Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Sheriff Cyrus Keaton had learned long ago that the desert kept its secrets better than most places. 32 years in Pima County law enforcement, the last 14 as sheriff, had taught him that the Sonoran Desert stretching south toward the Mexican border was a landscape designed for concealment. During monsoon season, the arroyos and washes could fill with rushing water in minutes, erasing tracks, moving evidence, swallowing whatever the desert wanted to hide. By September 2019, Keaton thought he'd seen everything this particular stretch of borderland could offer. The county seat of Tres Cruces sat 23 miles north of the international line, a town of 4,000 that serviced the ranchers, border patrol agents, and handful of mining operations still limping along in the surrounding hills. Keaton's jurisdiction covered nearly 3,000 square miles of mesquite flats, rocky washes, and isolated ranch properties where families had worked the same land for 5 generations. He knew most of them by name, knew their cattle brands, knew which back roads connected which properties and which dirt tracks led nowhere but deeper into the emptiness. The 911 call came in on a Thursday night in late September, just as the first monsoon storm of the season was building over the Huachuca Mountains to the east. Keaton was finishing paperwork in his office when the dispatcher, Rita Melendez, transferred the call directly to his line instead of routing it through the standard channels. That alone told him something was off. "Sheriff, I've got a situation here." Rita's voice carried the careful neutrality she used when something didn't add up. "Got a 911 from a woman reporting suspicious activity on her property. Says there's vehicles running back and forth on the wash road behind her place. No lights, middle of the night for the past 3 nights. What property?" Keaton asked, already reaching for his hat. "That's the thing." She gave an address on Scorpion Wash Road, about 8 miles south of town. Says her name is Ione Harker. Says she's the widow at the old Harker Ranch. Keaton felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd known the Harker place his entire life. Old cattle ranch that had gone quiet after Dalton Harker died in 2004. The property had sat empty since then, the house slowly being reclaimed by the desert, windows broken out by vandals, roof caving in. There was no widow. Dalton's wife Sarah had passed 6 months before he did, and they'd had no children. "You sure about that address?" he asked Rita. She was very specific. Said she lives at 4472 Scorpion Wash Road. That's the Harker place, right? "That's it, but Rita, nobody's lived there in 15 years. There was a pause on the line. "You want me to send Boaz out to check it?" Keaton considered. Deputy Boaz Cutter was good, thorough, not prone to jumping at shadows. But something about this call felt wrong in a way that made Keaton want to handle it himself. The storm was moving in fast, lightning already flickering on the horizon, and if there really were vehicles running the wash roads at night near the border, that suggested trafficking, either human or narcotic, and those situations could turn violent without warning. "No, I'll take it," Keaton said. "Have Boaz meet me at the junction of Scorpion and the county road. Tell him to come quiet, no lights until we see what we're dealing with." "You got it, Sheriff." Keaton grabbed his radio and spotlight from the charger, checked his sidearm, and headed out to his truck. The air had that electric quality that came before desert storms, temperature dropping fast as the system rolled in from the southeast. By the time he reached the county road, the first fat drops of rain were hitting his windshield, and the sky had gone the peculiar greenish-gray that meant serious weather. Boaz's truck was already waiting at the junction, parked on the shoulder with lights off. The deputy was in his early 30s, lean and sunburned, second-generation law enforcement. His father had worked with Keaton back in the 80s before retiring to Tucson. Boaz rolled down his window as Keaton pulled alongside. "Rita said something about the Harker place," Boaz called over the rising wind. "Woman called 911 claiming to be Ione Harker. Says she's seeing suspicious vehicles on the wash road behind her property." Boaz frowned. "Sheriff, I drove past that place last month. Roof's half gone, walls are falling in. Nobody could live there. I know it. That's why we're going to take a look before we dismiss it." They headed south on Scorpion Wash Road, following the track that paralleled the dry arroyo running down from the mountains. The storm was coming on fast now, wind pushing sheets of rain across the desert, visibility dropping to maybe 50 yards. Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder immediate and sharp enough to feel in Keaton's chest. The Harker ranch house appeared in his headlights like something from another era. Adobe walls weathered to almost the same color as the surrounding desert, wooden beams exposed where the roof had collapsed, empty windows staring out at nothing. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. There were no vehicles in the yard, no lights, no sign of occupation. Keaton and Boaz pulled up in front of the house, leaving their headlights on to illuminate the structure. The rain was coming down hard now, turning the dirt yard to mud. They sat for a moment, watching, waiting to see if anyone would emerge or if there was any indication someone might actually be inside. "I don't like this," Boaz said quietly. "Neither do I. Stay here, keep the radio up. I'm going to check the house." Keaton stepped out into the storm, rain immediately soaking through his uniform shirt. He approached the house with his flashlight in one hand, other hand on his weapon. The wooden steps to the front porch were mostly rotted through, so he stepped carefully, testing each board before putting his weight on it. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. "Ione Harker? Anyone home?" No response except the wind and rain. He stepped through the open doorway into what had been the front room. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of long abandonment. Dust and debris covered everything, chunks of plaster from the ceiling littering the floor. Desert mice had built nests in the corners. The smell was of dry rot and old adobe and the particular emptiness of places where people used to live but don't anymore. He moved through the house room by room, finding nothing but decay. No sign anyone had been here recently. No fresh footprints in the dust. No cleared spaces. No camping gear. Nothing to suggest occupation. The back door hung askew on broken hinges, offering a view of the wash beyond, just visible in the lightning flashes. Keaton returned to the trucks where Boaz was waiting, water running off his hat brim. "Nothing," Keaton said. "Place is dead empty. Nobody's been in there for years. So, what do we do about the call?" That was the question. Standard procedure would be to mark it as unfounded and move on. But something about it bothered Keaton. The specificity of the address, the detail about vehicles on the wash road, the name given. Someone had called 911 from somewhere, claiming to be a widow who didn't exist, reporting activity on a property nobody lived at. "Let's drive the wash road," Keaton said. "Long as we're out here, might as well check if there's anything to the vehicle's claim." They took Keaton's truck, following the dirt track that ran parallel to the arroyo. The wash itself was starting to run, muddy water flowing down from the mountains. Not yet the violent flood it would become if the storm kept up, but getting there. The road was rough, designed for ranch trucks and not much else, winding between mesquite and creosote bush, occasionally cutting close to the wash bank. They'd gone maybe 2 miles when Boaz pointed ahead. "Sheriff, tire tracks." Keaton saw them too, fresh ruts in the mud where vehicles had passed recently, maybe within the last few hours. Multiple vehicles by the look of it, good-sized trucks from the width and depth of the tracks. They followed the trail another quarter-mile until the tracks veered off the road and down toward the wash itself, disappearing into the darkness and rain. Keaton stopped the truck and grabbed his spotlight, playing it across the area. The wash was about 30 feet wide here, banks steep and rocky. The water running through the center was maybe a foot deep and rising. On the far side, just visible in the spotlight beam, he could make out more tire tracks leading up the opposite bank and continuing south. "They're crossing the wash," Boaz said. "Running loads, has to be." Keaton knew he was probably right. This was classic smuggling route behavior, using the remote wash roads where Border Patrol couldn't easily monitor, timing runs with the weather when helicopter surveillance would be grounded. But something about the timing bothered him. The call had come in before the storm hit, claiming vehicles had been running for 3 nights. Yet these tracks were fresh, made tonight, possibly within the last couple of hours. "We need to call Border Patrol," Boaz said. "Let them know there's traffic on this route." "We will. But first I want to understand who made that 911 call and why." They returned to the county road and headed back towards town, the storm intensifying around them. By the time they reached the station, the rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of deluge that would turn every wash in the county into a raging torrent within an hour. Rita looked up when they walked in, water dripping from their hats and jackets. "Find anything?" "Tracks on the wash road, vehicles crossing, probably within the last few hours," Keaton said. "But the house is abandoned, nobody there. Rita, I need you to pull the recording of that 911 call, and I need the number it came from." She pulled it up on her computer, and they listened to it together. The voice was female, older, with a slight tremor that suggested either fear or age, or both. The woman identified herself as Ione Harker, gave the specific address, and described seeing trucks running without lights on the wash road behind her property for 3 consecutive nights. She sounded entirely credible, entirely genuine. "Number shows as disconnected," Rita said, checking her screen. "It's an old landline that was assigned to the Harker property, but service was terminated in 2005. Keaton felt that cold sensation in his chest again. "Pull up the service records. I want to know when exactly that line was disconnected, and if there's been any activity on it since." While Rita worked, Keaton stood at the window watching the storm. Lightning was striking continuously now, turning the night into a strobe-lit nightmare. The wash that ran through town was already running bank to bank, muddy water carrying debris from up in the mountains. In a few hours, every low-water crossing in the county would be impassable. "Sheriff," Rita said quietly, "this is strange. Line was disconnected September 14th, 2005. That's 14 years ago, almost to the day. But according to these records, there was an attempt to place a call from that number tonight at 8:47 p.m. That's when the 911 came in," Boaz said. "How is that possible?" Keaton asked. "Can you call from a disconnected line?" "Technically, no. The physical line might still exist, running from the pole to the house, but without active service from the phone company, it shouldn't be able to connect to anything, especially not to 911 dispatch." Keaton thought about the house, the empty rooms, the disconnected wires hanging from the walls. Someone would have had to not only get old telephone equipment working, but somehow route it through lines that hadn't carried a signal in 14 years. It made no sense. "Is there any way to trace where the call actually originated?" he asked. Rita worked her keyboard for a few minutes, then shook her head. "The system logged it as coming from that Harker property number, but there's no GPS data, no cell tower information, nothing to indicate a physical location beyond what the old landline records show. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the station windows. Finally, Boaz spoke up. "Sheriff, you thinking what I'm thinking?" "Probably." Someone who knew about the old Harker place, knew the property had a widow before it was abandoned, knew the old phone number, made a call from somewhere else but spoofed it to look like it came from that disconnected line. Wanted us out there tonight for some reason. But we didn't find anything except those tracks. If someone wanted to set us up or distract us, why? That was the question Keaton couldn't answer. They'd found evidence of trafficking activity on the Wash Road, which they would have been looking for anyway. Nothing about the call had lured them into danger or pulled them away from something more important happening elsewhere in the county. If it was a setup, it had failed. If it was a distraction, he couldn't figure out from what. "Border Patrol needs to know about those tracks," Keaton said. "Boaz, call it in, give them the coordinates. Rita, I want you to flag that old Harker number in the system. If another call comes in from it, I want to know immediately." He stayed at the station until nearly midnight, catching up on reports and thinking about the call. The storm showed no signs of letting up, rain continuing to pour down, turning every dirt road in the county to impassable mud. Around 11, Boaz came back from meeting with Border Patrol agents at the location they'd found the tracks. "They're going to monitor it," Boaz reported. "But with the storm, they can't get vehicles down there tonight. Wash is running too high. They'll check it out tomorrow once the water goes down." Keaton nodded, still troubled. "Go home, get some rest. We'll follow up on this in the morning." But that night, lying in bed in his small house on the edge of town, listening to the storm rage outside, Keaton couldn't shake the feeling that they'd missed something important. The call had been too specific, too detailed, too carefully crafted to be a simple prank. Someone wanted them at that property tonight, wanted them to see those tracks, wanted them to know that vehicles were running the wash roads. The question was why, and what else was happening out there in the storm that they hadn't seen. Around 3 in the morning, he was startled awake by his phone. Rita's voice, tense and urgent. "Sheriff, we've got another call. Same number, same voice." Keaton was already reaching for his clothes. "What's she saying?" "She says they came back. Says there are men at her door." Keaton made it to the station in 12 minutes. The storm still raging, his truck hydroplaning twice on the flooded roads. Boaz was already there, looking like he'd thrown on his clothes in the dark. Rita had the call up on her console, and they could hear it playing through the speaker, the woman's voice tight with fear. "Please, they're trying to get in. I can hear them on the porch." "Ma'am, stay calm," Rita was saying. "Can you describe these men? How many are there? I can't see them clearly. 3, maybe 4. They have flashlights. Please send someone." "Officers are on the way. Can you go to a back room and lock the door?" There was a pause, filled with static, and the sound of wind and rain. Then the woman's voice came back, quieter now, almost a whisper. "They've stopped trying the door. They're just standing out there, waiting." Keaton grabbed the microphone. "This is Sheriff Keaton. Ma'am, we were at your property earlier tonight. The house appeared abandoned. Can you tell me exactly where you are right now?" Another pause, longer this time. When the woman spoke again, her voice had changed subtly, becoming more distant. "You were here? You were here and you didn't see me?" "The house was empty, ma'am. Every room was empty. But I was here. I'm always here. Where else would I be?" Something in the way she said it made Keaton's skin crawl. Before he could respond, the line filled with a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, and then it went dead. Rita tried calling back, but the number just rang endlessly. No answer, no voicemail. Keaton stood staring at the console, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. Boaz moved closer, keeping his voice low. "Sheriff, we both went through that house room by room. Nobody was there." "I know. So either she's calling from somewhere else entirely, and we've been wrong about the location, or what?" Boaz hesitated. "Or something else is going on that doesn't make any kind of sense." Keaton turned to Rita. "Pull up everything we have on the Harker property. Original deed records, family history, anything in our files about that place." While Rita worked, Keaton poured himself coffee from the station pot, his hands steadier than he felt. The storm was beginning to ease, rain letting up slightly, though the washes would stay flooded for hours yet. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn lighting the eastern sky, turning the storm clouds from black to charcoal gray. "Got something," Rita said. There was an incident report filed in August 2004, about a month before Dalton Harker died. Deputy responded to a disturbance call at the property. "What kind of disturbance?" "Report says shots fired. When the deputy arrived, he found Dalton Harker on his front porch with a rifle. Harker claimed there had been people on his property trying to break into his house. Deputy searched the area, found no evidence of intruders. Noted in the report that Harker seemed confused, possibly suffering from early dementia. There was a note recommending a wellness check, but..." She scrolled down. "Harker died 3 weeks later, heart attack. Property went to a nephew in California who never bothered to maintain it or sell it. Anything else?" "There's an older report from 1998. Border Patrol found evidence of trafficking activity on the wash roads near the Harker property. They set up surveillance for a few weeks but never caught anyone. Activity stopped as suddenly as it started." Keaton thought about the fresh tracks they'd seen earlier, the vehicles crossing the wash in the storm. 21 years between incidents seemed like a long gap, but these routes had been used for smuggling since before the border was even formally established. Traffickers would use a route until it got hot, then abandon it for years before trying again. "What about the phone line?" he asked. "Anything unusual about when it was disconnected?" Rita checked her notes. "September 14th, 2005. That was about a year after Dalton died. Nephew probably shut off utilities once he realized he wasn't going to do anything with the property." Keaton drained his coffee and set the cup down with more force than necessary. "Get Border Patrol on the line. I want to know if they've had any activity reports near the Harker property in the last 6 months. Any sightings, any tracks, anything." While Rita made the call, Keaton walked to the window and watched the dawn come up over the desert. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and strange in the early light. He'd lived in this county his entire life, worked these roads for 3 decades, and he knew in his gut when something was wrong. 2 calls from a disconnected phone line, a voice claiming to be a dead woman, reports of men at the door of an empty house. It added up to something, but he couldn't see the shape of it yet. Boaz came to stand beside him. "What are you thinking, Sheriff?" "I'm thinking someone is playing a very elaborate game, and I don't understand the rules yet." "You think it's connected to the trafficking? Maybe they're trying to scare us away from monitoring that area." "Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to draw us in for some reason we haven't figured out." Rita called over from her desk. "Border Patrol says they've had no activity reports near the Harker property in over a year. They've been focused further east, different routes. They seem surprised to hear about the tracks we found. Tell them we need eyes on that location as soon as the washes are passable. I want to know what's moving through there." The morning shift started filtering in, deputies getting ready for patrols, the station coming to life. Keaton briefed them on the situation, told them to stay alert for any unusual activity near the southern part of the county. He thought about going home to get a few hours of sleep, but something kept him at the station, a feeling he couldn't name that if he left, he'd miss something important. Around 9 in the morning, his instinct proved correct. The phone on Rita's desk rang, and even before she answered it, Keaton knew what it was going to be. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "Sheriff, it's that number again." This time he had Rita transfer it directly to his office. He sat at his desk, staring at the phone for a moment before picking it up. "This is Sheriff Keaton." "Sheriff?" The woman's voice was calm now, almost conversational. "You came back during the storm. I heard your truck. Ma'am, I need you to tell me who you really are and where you're actually calling from. I told you. My name is Ione Harker. I live at 4472 Scorpion Wash Road. I've lived here for 43 years. Keaton felt a chill run down his spine. 43 years ago would have been 1976, which roughly matched when Dalton and Sarah Harker would have bought the property. But Sarah Harker had never gone by Ione. He'd checked the records. Her name was Sarah Elizabeth Harker, née Morrison. "There is no Ione Harker," he said carefully. "Sarah Harker died in 2004. "Sarah," the woman laughed, a sound like wind through dry grass. "Is that what they called me? I suppose it doesn't matter now. Names are just sounds we make to pretend we know each other. Ma'am, are you in danger? Do you need medical assistance?" "I need you to understand, Sheriff. They use the wash roads. They've been using them for a very long time. Longer than you've been alive. Longer than this town has had a name. The water brings them and takes them away, and we're supposed to pretend we don't see. Who uses the wash roads? You saw the tracks. You know what they're running. But you didn't see everything, did you? You didn't see what they left behind." Keaton's mind was racing. What did they leave behind? The desert keeps its secrets, Sheriff. But sometimes the water washes them clean. Sometimes they come up to the surface whether we want them to or not. I need you to give me a straight answer. Are there people in danger? Is there something we need to find? The line crackled with static. When the woman spoke again, her voice seemed to come from very far away. "Go back to the wash where you saw the tracks. Follow the water south. You'll find what you're looking for, but Sheriff, be careful what you wish to find. Some discoveries can't be undone." The line went dead. Keaton sat holding the phone for a moment, then slowly set it back in the cradle. Through his office window he could see Boaz talking with Rita, both of them watching him with concern. He stood up and walked out to join them. "Get your gear," he told Boaz. "We're going back to the Harker property." "Sheriff, maybe we should wait for Border Patrol backup." "We're not waiting. That woman, whoever she is, knows something about what's happening out there. She's trying to tell us something, and I need to know what it is before anyone else gets hurt." The drive south took longer than usual, the roads still slick with mud, water standing in the low spots. They passed several other vehicles heading north. Ranchers and Border Patrol, everyone heading away from the borderlands after the storm. The sky was clear now, that impossibly deep blue that followed monsoon rains, the air scrubbed clean and smelling of creosote. When they reached the Harker property, Keaton pulled past it and continued to where they'd found the tire tracks the night before. In daylight, the scene looked different. The wash was still running, brown water churning through the channel, but not as violently as during the storm. The banks were lined with debris, torn mesquite branches, and chunks of foam, the detritus the flood had carried down from the mountains. They got out and walked to the edge of the wash, looking down at the water. The tracks they'd seen last night were mostly washed away, just faint impressions in the mud showing where vehicles had crossed. Keaton studied the opposite bank, trying to see what they might have missed in the darkness and rain. There, Boaz said, pointing downstream. "Is that what I think it is?" About 100 yards down, something pale was caught against a rock outcropping where the water had to bend around a curve in the wash. At first, Keaton thought it was just more debris, maybe a plastic tarp or a piece of insulation. But as he walked closer, moving carefully along the muddy bank, he realized with growing horror what he was looking at. It was a tarp, but it wasn't empty. The flood had partially unwrapped whatever was inside, revealing a human arm, the skin waxy and pale, fingers curled slightly as if grasping at something that wasn't there. The body had been wrapped carefully in plastic sheeting, and the blue tarp, weighted down with something, probably rocks. But the violence of the floodwater had torn it loose from wherever it had been buried and carried it downstream until it snagged on the rocks. "Jesus," Boaz said quietly, coming up beside him. "How long has that been in there?" Keaton didn't answer immediately. He was looking downstream, following the line of the wash with his eyes, thinking about what the woman on the phone had said. "Follow the water south. You'll find what you're looking for." "Call it in," he told Boaz. "State police, medical examiner, border patrol, everyone. And tell them to bring ground-penetrating radar and a full forensics team. I don't think this is the only one." While Boaz made the calls, Keaton walked further downstream, scanning both banks of the wash. The storm had scoured away months or maybe years of accumulated dirt and sand, exposing the raw earth beneath. Here and there he could see places where the bank had collapsed, revealing cross-sections of sediment layers. And in 2 more locations, he found what he'd been looking for and dreading. More bundles wrapped in plastic and tarps, partially exposed by the flooding, still mostly buried in the wash bank. One appeared to have been there for years, the tarp rotted and torn, what remained inside nothing but bones. The other was more recent, the plastic still intact, the shape inside unmistakably human. By noon, the wash was swarming with investigators. State police had set up a command post, and forensic teams were carefully excavating the bundles Keaton had found. The medical examiner, a stern woman named Dr. Margaret Rhodes, who Keaton had worked with for years, approached him as he stood watching the operation. "At least 5 so far," she said without preamble. "Maybe more once we do a complete survey of the area. Some of these have been here for decades, Sheriff. We're looking at a dumping ground that's been in use for a very long time. Can you tell me anything about the victims?" "Not until we get them back to the lab. But preliminarily, all adults, mix of male and female from what I can see. Some show signs of trauma. This wasn't natural death." Keaton turned to look back toward the Harker property, barely visible in the distance. Someone had been dumping bodies in this wash for years, probably decades. Using the remote location, the seasonal flooding to hide and destroy evidence. The traffickers running loads through here would have known about it, maybe even contributed to it. And somehow, a woman calling from a disconnected phone line had led them directly to it. "Dr. Rhodes, how quickly can you establish time of death on the most recent victim?" "Rough estimate, within the last month, maybe 2 weeks if the water temperature stayed cool." Keaton felt his stomach tighten. 2 weeks ago, a Border Patrol agent had found an abandoned pickup truck about 10 miles east of here. The agent had reported it as possible smuggling activity, vehicle used and dumped. But there had been blood in the truck bed, not much, but enough to suggest someone had been injured. They'd searched the area and found nothing. Assumed the injured person had been taken back across the border for treatment. "I need to make some calls," he told Dr. Rhodes, and walked back to his truck. The rest of the day was consumed by the investigation. More bodies were found as forensic teams worked their way along the wash. By late afternoon, the count was up to 11, spanning what appeared to be at least 30 years. Border Patrol brought in their intelligence analysts, and a grim picture began to emerge. This section of Wash had been used as a disposal site by whoever was running the trafficking routes in the area, a convenient way to get rid of problems, witnesses, competitors, or people who simply knew too much. As sunset approached, Keaton stood at the edge of the crime scene, watching the forensic teams work under portable lights. Boaz came over carrying 2 bottles of water, and they stood in silence for a moment. "Sheriff," Boaz finally said, "those phone calls. You think someone knew these bodies were here and wanted us to find them? I think someone knows a lot more than they're telling us. But who? And why now after all these years?" That was the question Keaton couldn't answer. He thought about the woman's voice on the phone, the strange things she'd said about the wash roads and the desert keeping its secrets. He thought about the abandoned Harker house and old Dalton Harker standing on his porch with a rifle, claiming there were intruders on his property. "I need to go back to that house," Keaton said suddenly. "Sheriff, it's getting dark. Maybe we should wait until morning." "No. If we wait, the opportunity might be gone." They drove back to the Harker property as the last light was fading from the sky. The house looked even more desolate in the twilight, a shell of a building slowly being consumed by the desert. Keaton grabbed his flashlight and walked up to the front porch, Boaz following reluctantly. Inside, everything appeared exactly as it had the night before. Dust, debris, decay. But Keaton moved through the rooms more slowly this time, paying attention to details he'd missed in the storm's urgency. In what had been the living room, he noticed something that made him pause. The dust on the floor wasn't uniform. There was a path, faint but visible, leading from the front door through to the back of the house, as if someone had walked through regularly enough to keep one track relatively clear. But their boots the night before would have disturbed that pattern, and yet here it was again, fresh. He followed the path to the back door, then out into the yard. The wash road was visible from here, maybe 200 yards away. From this vantage point, you could see vehicles approaching from either direction, could watch the wash itself without being easily seen. "Someone's been using this place as an observation post," Keaton said. "Watching the trafficking routes, monitoring who comes and goes. The woman on the phone? Maybe. Or maybe she's just trying to tell us about whoever is." They searched the property more thoroughly, using flashlights in the growing darkness. In an old storage shed behind the main house, Boaz found something that made them both stop cold. A sleeping bag, relatively new, and a small camp stove. Empty water bottles and food wrappers. Someone had been staying here, not in the house itself, but in this shed, hidden from casual observation. And on the ground next to the sleeping bag, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture, was an old landline telephone. Keaton stared at the telephone for a long moment before carefully picking it up with a gloved hand. It was an old rotary model, harvest gold plastic that had probably been popular in the 70s. The cord had been cut, leaving just a few inches of wire hanging from the base. Someone had taken care to protect it, wrapping it in multiple layers of plastic sheeting, sealing it against moisture and dust. "How would this even work?" Boaz asked, shining his flashlight on the device. "There's no cord to connect it to anything." "I don't know, but someone thought it was worth keeping." Keaton turned the phone over, examining it from all angles. On the bottom, written in faded marker, were numbers: 520-555-047, the Harker landline number. They bagged the phone as evidence and continued searching the shed, finding more items that suggested extended occupation. A battery-powered radio, still functional. A notebook with pages of handwritten notes, mostly times and dates, some with vehicle descriptions. Someone had been watching the wash road for months, maybe longer, documenting the trafficking activity with meticulous attention to detail. The most recent entry was dated 3 days ago, the night before the first 911 call. 3 vehicles, 11:47 p.m. running dark, crossed at the usual spot. Heard shots after they passed. Something wrong this time. "Sheriff," Boaz said quietly, holding up a photograph he'd found tucked into the notebook. It showed a woman, maybe in her 60s, standing in front of the Harker house when it had still been intact. She was thin, weathered by sun and desert wind, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a braid. The photo appeared to be several years old. Keaton studied the image. "This might be our caller, but who is she?" They took everything back to the station, where Rita was waiting despite the late hour. She'd been following the news about the bodies found in the wash, and her expression was grim when they walked in. "It's all over the radio," she said. "Reporters are already asking for a statement. What do you want me to tell them?" "Tell them we're conducting an ongoing investigation, and we'll release information as it becomes available. Standard response." Keaton set the evidence bags on her desk. "But what I really need is for you to look at this photo and tell me if you recognize this woman." Rita picked up the photo, squinting at it under the desk lamp. After a moment, her eyes widened slightly. "Sheriff, I think that's Ione Harker." Sarah Harker's first name was Sarah, not Ione. "I know, but there was an Ione Harker, Dalton's first wife. They were married in the late 70s, divorced in the mid-80s. I only know because my mother used to talk about it. She and Ione were friendly, used to get coffee sometimes in town. Mom said Ione left suddenly, just packed up and disappeared one day. Dalton married Sarah a few years later." Keaton felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "Your mother still alive?" "She's in an assisted living facility in Tucson. Early dementia, but she has good days and bad days. Can you call her in the morning? I need to know everything she remembers about Ione Harker. When she left, why she left, anything." They worked late into the night, processing evidence and coordinating with state police. Border Patrol intelligence confirmed that the wash road near the Harker property had been identified as a smuggling route as far back as the 70s, though activity came and went in cycles. The discovery of the bodies suggested it had also been used for something much darker. Around 2 in the morning, Keaton finally headed home. Exhausted, but too wired to sleep. He lived in a small adobe house on the north edge of Tres Cruces, a place he'd bought after his divorce 15 years ago. The house was dark and quiet, and he moved through it like a ghost, pouring whiskey he didn't drink and standing at the kitchen window looking out at the desert night. The phone rang, and he knew before picking it up who it would be. "Sheriff Keaton." The woman's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You found them. All 11 so far. There might be more." "There are more. The wash goes a long way south. It's been taking them for 40 years. Keaton gripped the phone tightly. "I know who you are. Ione Harker, Dalton's first wife. You didn't disappear. You've been out there all this time, haven't you?" There was a long silence, then, softly, "Someone had to watch." Watch for what? To see what they were doing. To remember the people they threw away like garbage. To make sure that someday someone would know. "Why didn't you come forward? Why not report this years ago?" "Who would have believed me? A divorced woman living in the desert, telling stories about bodies in the wash? They would have said I was crazy." "Maybe I am crazy, Sheriff. Maybe that's what 40 years alone in the desert does to a person." Keaton thought about the shed behind the Harker house, the sleeping bag and camp stove, the notebooks full of observations. "You've been calling from that phone we found, the one with the cut cord. How?" "Old telephone lines carry memory, Sheriff. They remember every conversation that ever traveled through them. Every desperate call, every plea for help. You just need to know how to listen. That's not how phones work, isn't it? Then how did I call you? Keaton had no answer for that. He'd seen the disconnected line, seen the phone company's records. Yet, somehow, the calls had come through. I need you to come in. We need your statement, your testimony about what you've seen out here. I can't do that. Why not? Because they know I'm here now. They've known since the moment you found those bodies. And they're coming to make sure I don't tell you anything else. Who's coming? The traffickers. The ones who run the routes, yes, but also the ones who protect them. The ones who make sure the right people look the other way. You think this operation runs for 40 years without help from inside? Without people in uniforms making sure nobody looks too close? The accusation hung in the air between them. Keaton wanted to deny it. To say that no law enforcement officer in his county would be complicit in murder and trafficking. But he'd been doing this job long enough to know that corruption could exist anywhere, that money and fear could turn people into things they never thought they'd become. If what you're saying is true, then you're in danger right now. Let me send deputies to bring you in, keep you safe. Can you promise me they're not on the payroll? Can you guarantee that whoever you send isn't one of the ones who's been taking money to stay blind? Keaton wanted to say yes, but the words stuck in his throat. He trusted Boaz completely, would stake his life on the deputy's integrity. Rita had been with the department for 20 years, and he'd never had reason to doubt her. But beyond that, could he be absolutely certain? The county employed 30 deputies, half a dozen dispatchers, support staff. He knew them, had worked alongside them, but did he really know who they were when no one was watching? Then tell me where you are, he said. I'll come alone, just me. You can trust me. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore, Sheriff, but I've been watching you. I've seen how you work, how you care about the people in this county. So I'm going to tell you something important, and I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening. 3 nights ago, when those vehicles crossed the wash during the storm, they were running a special delivery. Not drugs, not people. Something else, information. Files that prove who's been taking payments, who's been providing protection. Names, dates, amounts, everything needed to bring down the whole network. Where are these files? Hidden on the old Harker property. Buried in the desert where only I know where to look. That's why they're coming tonight. They know I'm the only one who can find it, and they need to make sure I can't tell anyone else. Keaton was already reaching for his keys. Stay where you are. I'm coming right now. No, Sheriff, if you come now, they'll see you. They're watching the roads, waiting. You need to wait until dawn. Come in from the east, through the BLM land, approach on foot. Come alone, or don't come at all. I can't promise your safety if I come alone. I've been keeping myself safe for 40 years. I can manage one more night. Dawn, Sheriff, east approach. Look for the smoke tree growing sideways out of the wash bank. I'll meet you there. The line went dead. Keaton immediately tried calling back, but the phone just rang endlessly, hollow and empty. He stood in his dark kitchen, phone in hand, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told him to head out there right now, to not leave a witness exposed and vulnerable. But another part of him, the part that had kept him alive through 3 decades of dangerous situations, warned him to think carefully about who he could trust. He called Boaz, waking the deputy from what sounded like deep sleep. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions until after you've done it. Sheriff, what's going on? I need you to pull personnel files for everyone in the department. Cross-reference their bank records, property holdings, anything that might show unexplained income. Look for patterns, anything unusual. There was a pause. You think someone in the department is involved with what's happening out there? I think we need to know for sure that they're not. Can you do this quietly? I'll need authorization from the county administrator for some of those records. Then wake him up. This can't wait. After hanging up with Boaz, Keaton spent the next few hours going through his own files, looking for anything he might have missed over the years. Reports of suspicious activity near the wash roads, missing persons cases that had never been solved, traffic stops that had been called off or dismissed. He found more than he wanted to. Not proof of corruption exactly, but enough oddities and coincidences to suggest that someone, somewhere, had been protecting the trafficking operations. At 4:30 in the morning, Boaz called back. "Sheriff, I found something. Deputy Marcus Landry. He's been with the department for 8 years. Solid record, no complaints. But his bank records show regular deposits of $2,000 every month from an LLC registered in Mexico. Started about 6 years ago. Marcus Landry. Young deputy, ambitious, always volunteering for the night shifts along the border roads. Keaton had thought he was just eager, building a reputation. Now he saw it differently. Where is he right now? Should be on patrol, southern sector. You want me to call him in? No, don't do anything that might alert him. Just keep monitoring his location through his GPS. I need to know where he is at all times." Keaton waited until first light before heading out, taking his personal truck instead of the sheriff's vehicle, driving without radio contact. He parked on BLM land 3 miles east of the Harker property and continued on foot, carrying just his sidearm and a radio with the battery removed. If anyone was tracking department communications, they wouldn't see him coming. The desert morning was cold and beautiful, the sun just breaking over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. He walked through creosote and mesquite, following game trails when he could, making his own path when necessary. It took him nearly an hour to reach the wash, approaching from above so he could see the terrain before committing. The smoke tree was exactly where Ione had described, growing at an impossible angle from the wash bank, its gray-green branches reaching toward the water. Keaton worked his way down carefully, loose rocks sliding under his boots. The wash was still running from the storm, but lower now, just a trickle through the center channel. He waited by the smoke tree, scanning the area, seeing no sign of Ione or anyone else. The sun climbed higher, heat beginning to build. Keaton checked his watch. He'd been here 20 minutes. Where was she? Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks coming down the wash from the north. Multiple vehicles leading to a spot about 200 yards upstream. And in the soft sand near the water's edge, he could see boot prints and drag marks leading toward a cluster of boulders. Keaton moved quickly but quietly, following the tracks. He found her behind the boulders, half hidden in the sand. Ione Harker, looking older than her photo, but unmistakably the same woman. She was lying still, and for a terrible moment he thought he was too late. Then he saw her chest rise and fall, shallow breaths. He knelt beside her, checking for injuries. There was blood on the side of her head, matted in her gray hair. She'd been struck, hard enough to knock her unconscious, but not hard enough to kill. Not yet. Her eyes flickered open, focusing on him with difficulty. "Sheriff," she whispered. "They came early. Knew I was going to talk. Don't try to move. I'm going to call for medical assistance." "No." Her hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "No radio. They're listening. Marcus Landry, he's one of them." "I know. We found his bank records. There are others. I have names. The files, they're buried under the old windmill foundation on the property. 30 feet from the base, due north. Metal box 3 feet down." She coughed, and blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Get them, Sheriff." Make them pay for what they did to all those people. I will. But first, I'm getting you out of here. Too late for me. I've been living on borrowed time for 40 years. But you can finish this. You can give those people in the wash their names back. Let their families know what happened. Keaton heard something then. The sound of vehicles approaching from the south. Multiple trucks moving fast. He looked around desperately, trying to find cover, somewhere to hide. But the wash was open here. No good options. Whoever was coming would be here in minutes. Go, Ione said. Get to the property. Find the files, that's what matters. I'm not leaving you. Sheriff, if they catch you here, everything I've done for 40 years means nothing. Those files are the only proof. Without them, it's just the word of a crazy woman living in the desert. Go now, while you still can. The vehicles were getting closer. Keaton could see dust rising downstream. He had maybe 2 minutes before they arrived. 2 minutes to decide between staying with the dying witness or saving the evidence that could bring down a trafficking network. He made the choice every good cop hates. He squeezed Ione's hand once, then turned and ran, heading north along the washbank, using every bit of cover he could find. Behind him, he heard the trucks arrive, heard voices shouting. A gunshot cracked out, echoing off the wash walls, and he forced himself not to look back. He ran until his lungs burned, until the trucks were out of sight behind him. Then he climbed out of the wash and headed across the desert toward the Harker property. The morning sun beating down, knowing that somewhere behind him, a woman who had spent 40 years trying to bear witness to murder was paying the final price for doing the right thing. The old windmill was still standing, barely, its blades long since rusted into immobility. Keaton counted 30 feet north and started digging with his hands, clawing at the hard desert soil. 3 feet down, his fingers hit metal. He pulled out a weathered ammunition box, the kind soldiers used to use, sealed with tape. Inside were files, hundreds of pages of documentation. Bank statements, photographs of meetings, manifests, cargo lists, and names. Deputy Marcus Landry was just the beginning. There were others, some in law enforcement, some in border services, some in positions Keaton had never suspected. A network spanning decades, protecting the trafficking routes, ensuring the bodies in the wash stayed hidden. He was still reading when he heard vehicles approaching the Harker property. He grabbed the box and ran toward his truck. 3 miles of desert to cover with no cover, and hunters closing in behind him. This was going to be close. Keaton ran through the desert with the ammunition box clutched against his chest, the morning sun already turning the landscape into a furnace. Behind him, he could hear engines, the sound carrying across the empty land. They were spreading out, trying to cut off his route to his truck. He changed direction, angling northeast toward a line of low hills that might offer cover. The terrain worked against him. Open flats with scattered creosote offered no concealment, and the box was heavy, slowing him down. His boots slipped on loose gravel as he climbed towards the hills, lungs burning, sweat already soaking through his shirt. He was 54 years old, not the young deputy who used to run these badlands for sport. Age and desk work had taken their toll. He made it to the hills and dropped behind a rock outcropping, gasping for air. From this vantage, he could see 3 trucks fanned out below, systematically searching the desert. One of them was a sheriff's department vehicle, Marcus Landry's unit. The other 2 were civilian trucks, the kind ranchers used, which meant this went beyond one corrupt deputy. This was organized, coordinated. Keaton pulled out his phone, hoping for a signal. Nothing. He was in a dead zone, miles from the nearest tower. The radio in his truck would work, but the truck was 2 miles away through open desert, and they were between him and it. He needed another plan. He opened the ammunition box and started pulling out files, photographing pages with his phone even though he had no signal to send them. If they caught him, at least the evidence would be on the device, recoverable later. He worked quickly, capturing account numbers, photographs, handwritten notes. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Monthly payments going back 15 years to at least 6 different law enforcement officials, not just in his department but in Border Patrol and even the county prosecutor's office. One document made him stop cold. A ledger of sorts, listing dates and amounts next to initials. Most he didn't recognize, but one set made his stomach turn. CK, declined, monitored. His own initials. They'd approached him at some point, or at least considered it, then decided to simply watch him instead. How long had they been monitoring him, making sure he didn't get too close to the truth? A voice called out from below, echoing off the rocks. "Sheriff Keaton, we know you're up there. Let's talk this through like reasonable people." He recognized the voice. Marcus Landry. Young, ambitious Marcus who always volunteered for border patrols, who knew the wash roads better than anyone. Of course he did. He'd been protecting them. Keaton said nothing, continuing to photograph documents. His phone showed 127 pictures captured. Not everything, but enough. Enough to bring down the network if he could get it to the right people. The question was who the right people were when the corruption ran this deep. "Sheriff, you've got maybe an hour before you die of heat stroke out here. It's going to be 95 degrees by noon, and you've got no water. Come down, let's talk about this. Nobody else has to get hurt." "Like Ione Harker?" Keaton called back. "Is she going to be okay?" Silence for a moment, then, "She made her choice. 40 years she could have kept her mouth shut, lived her life. She chose to interfere. She chose to document murder. She chose to not understand how things work out here. Some activities exist in a gray area, Sheriff. Always have, probably always will. Smart people recognize that and stay out of the way." Keaton finished photographing the documents and carefully replaced them in the box. His phone battery was at 38%. Even if he got a signal, he'd need to conserve power. He checked his weapon. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Against 3 trucks full of people, it wouldn't be enough for a firefight. He'd have to be smarter than that. The rock formation he was hiding in had a crack running through it, a narrow crevice that looked like it might go deeper into the hillside. Keaton squeezed through, finding that it opened into a small cavity, barely large enough for a person. Desert animals had used it, the floor covered with old scat and bones. But it was concealment, and right now that was more valuable than comfort. He wedged himself into the space and waited. The heat was building fast, the rocks already warm to the touch. In a few hours, this cavity would be an oven. But he didn't need a few hours, he just needed them to make a mistake. He heard them climbing the rocks, boots scraping on stone, voices calling to each other. They were spreading out, searching systematically. Professional, careful. These weren't panicked criminals. These were trained people who knew what they were doing. A shadow passed across the opening of his hiding spot. Someone was right outside. Keaton held his breath, pressed against the hot rock, the ammunition box wedged behind him. The shadow moved on. He heard Marcus's voice, closer now. "He's not up here. Must have kept moving, trying to get to his truck." "Check the washes," another voice said. He might have dropped into one for cover. In this heat, he'd be dead in an hour. Then we wait him out, post someone at his truck, someone watching the road back to town. He has to come out eventually, and when he does, we end this. They withdrew, boots clattering back down the rocks. Keaton waited a full 20 minutes before emerging from his hiding spot, every muscle cramped and protesting. From his vantage, he could see one truck parked near where his vehicle was hidden. The other two had moved off, presumably to watch other approaches. He had the ammunition box and his phone full of evidence, but he was trapped. The smart play would be to wait until dark. Use the cover of night to slip past them. But that was 10 hours away. 10 hours in this heat with no water, and 10 hours for them to call in more help or decide to bring dogs to track him. His radio. They'd taken it from his truck, of course, but there might be another option. He thought about the old telephone, the impossible calls from a disconnected line. Ione had said something about phone lines carrying memory, about knowing how to listen. He'd dismissed it as the ramblings of someone who'd spent too long alone in the desert. But the calls had been real. The phone had worked despite every technical reason it shouldn't. There was an old phone line that ran through this area, strung decades ago to connect remote ranch properties. Most of the poles were down, but some still stood, wire sagging between them, connected to nothing. Keaton had seen them 100 times and never thought twice about them. He worked his way along the hillside, staying low, until he spotted a pole still standing about a quarter-mile away. The wire attached to it drooped to the ground, disappearing into the sand. Probably severed, but maybe, if Ione was right about the lines carrying memory, maybe there was something there he could use. It took him 40 minutes to reach the pole, moving from cover to cover, constantly checking for the trucks. The wire was old, sun-damaged, but when he brushed away sand, he found it still intact, running underground toward the next pole. He had no equipment to tap into it, no way to access whatever impossible connection Ione had used. But he had his phone. He opened the camera, switched to video, and started recording. My name is Sheriff Cyrus Keaton, Pima County, Arizona. Today is September 24th, 2019. I'm being hunted by members of a trafficking network that includes law enforcement officers from my own department. I have evidence of corruption spanning 15 years, including bank records, photographs, and documents linking multiple officials to organized crime. He held up pages from the ammunition box, showing them to the camera. If I don't make it out of here, this video and the photographs on this phone represent the only surviving evidence. He continued recording, naming names, describing the bodies in the wash, explaining about Ione Harker and the 40 years she spent documenting murder while everyone looked away. When he finished, the video was 18 minutes long and his phone battery was at 19%. He had no signal to upload it anywhere. The video existed only on this device. If they caught him, they'd destroy it, and everything Ione had died for would be lost. He needed to hide it. Somewhere it might be found later, by someone who'd know what to do with it. The old phone line wire gave him an idea. He wrapped the phone in plastic from one of the evidence bags, then dug down to where the wire ran underground. Using his knife, he cut away a section of the wire's insulation and wrapped the phone package tightly to the bare metal, then reburied it. The wire would act as a marker, something searchers might follow if they came looking for evidence later. It was a desperate gamble, but better than keeping it on him. He took the ammunition box and started walking northwest, away from his truck, away from the main roads. If he could reach the highway, he might be able to flag down help. It was 12 miles through open desert, in 100-degree heat, with no water. He'd probably die trying, but at least the evidence was hidden, cached underground with an impossible telephone system that had somehow carried a dead woman's voice across disconnected lines. He made it 4 miles before they caught up with him. The truck came from the north, cutting him off, and he was too exhausted to run anymore. Marcus Landry got out, along with 2 other men Keaton didn't recognize. They weren't pointing guns. Not yet. "Sheriff," Marcus said, almost sadly, "you really should have stayed out of this." "Can't do that. It's not who I am." "Yeah, I know. That's what the note said about you. Too honest, too dedicated. They knew you'd never take money. That's why we had to watch you so carefully all these years." Keaton lowered the ammunition box to the ground, too tired to hold it anymore. "You know this ends badly for you. People know I came out here. When I don't come back, they'll search. They'll find your truck and signs of a confrontation with traffickers. Tragic story. Sheriff died in the line of duty trying to stop a smuggling operation. You'll get a nice funeral, maybe a building named after you. And the bodies in the wash? Those will stay exactly what they were yesterday. Unidentified remains from trafficking violence. Terrible, but not surprising given the location. The investigation will stall out, like these things do." One of the other men spoke up, nervous. "We need to move. Someone could come." "Nobody comes out here," Marcus said. "That's why it works." He turned back to Keaton. "Where's your phone?" "Lost it." "Sheriff, we saw you taking pictures up in the rocks. Where is it?" Keaton said nothing. Marcus sighed and nodded to the other men who began searching him, rough hands going through his pockets. They found nothing. Marcus picked up the ammunition box and looked through it, his face darkening. "Some of these pages are missing. You photographed everything, didn't you? Uploaded it somewhere? No signal out here, as you well know. But you tried. Where's the phone, Sheriff?" When Keaton still didn't answer, Marcus pulled his weapon. "Last chance. I don't want to do this, but I will." Keaton thought about Ione Harker, spending 40 years in the desert, watching evil happen and carefully documenting it, knowing she might never live to see justice. He thought about the 11 bodies in the wash, people who'd been thrown away and forgotten. He thought about Rita's mother, who'd been friends with Ione before she disappeared, and about Boaz, who right now was probably finding all the rest of the evidence needed to bring these people down even without the phone. "You're going to shoot a sheriff in broad daylight?" Keaton said. "That's bold, even for you. We're going to report that you were killed by traffickers. Your body will tell that story. It's unfortunate, but these things happen on the border. Except Boaz knows I came out here alone. He knows about you, Marcus. He's got your bank records. Even if you kill me, this is done." Marcus's expression flickered. Doubt, uncertainty. "You're lying. Call him. Ask him what he found last night going through personnel files." The hesitation in Marcus's face was enough. Keaton moved, not toward Marcus, but toward the truck. He didn't make it 3 steps before the shot rang out, the impact spinning him around, dropping him to the hot sand. Pain exploded in his left shoulder, but he was alive, still conscious. He'd been shot before, knew he had minutes before shock set in. Marcus was standing over him, weapon still raised. "Where is the phone?" Keaton smiled, tasting blood. "Buried, where you'll never find it. But someone will, eventually. Might be tomorrow, might be 10 years from now. But they'll find it. And when they do, your name is all over that video." He saw the calculation in Marcus's eyes. Kill him now, and the phone stays hidden, possibly forever. But if anyone came looking, if Boaz really did have evidence, there would be questions Marcus couldn't answer. The deputy was trapped, and he knew it. The sound of a helicopter broke the desert silence. Everyone looked up, shielding their eyes against the sun. A border patrol chopper flying low, heading directly toward them. Someone had called them, reported the gunshot. Or maybe Boaz had been smarter than any of them and arranged backup without Keaton knowing. Marcus looked at Keaton, then at the approaching helicopter. He made his choice. "We were here investigating reports of trafficking. Found the sheriff injured. Called for medical assistance." He holstered his weapon and called to the other men. "Help me get him to the truck. Move." They loaded Keaton roughly into the truck bed as the helicopter circled overhead. Marcus drove fast toward the county road, calling for an ambulance on his radio, playing the role of concerned deputy. Keaton drifted in and out of consciousness, pain from his shoulder mixing with exhaustion and dehydration. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Tucson. Boaz was sitting beside his bed, looking like he hadn't slept since the incident. Rita was there too, her face tired and drawn. "Sheriff," Boaz said quietly. "Thank God." "Marcus?" Keaton managed. "In custody, federal custody. Once we pulled his bank records and started looking at the others, things moved fast. 5 arrests so far, including someone from the prosecutor's office. The FBI is handling it now." "My phone. Did you find my phone?" Boaz and Rita exchanged glances. "No phone, Sheriff. We searched the entire area, used dogs, ground-penetrating radar. If it's out there, we couldn't locate it." Keaton closed his eyes. The evidence was still hidden, wrapped around an old phone line that might or might not carry impossible signals from dead women who refused to stop bearing witness. Maybe someone would find it someday. Maybe it would stay buried forever. "The bodies?" he asked. 15 total once they finish the excavation. Medical examiner is working on identifications. It'll take months, maybe years, but families will get answers eventually. "And Ione Harker?" Rita's eyes filled with tears. "We found her in the wash. Medical examiner says she'd been dead about 2 hours when we got there. Sheriff, I called my mother, asked her about Ione. Mom said she was the strongest person she ever knew. Said Ione left Dalton because she found out about the trafficking, tried to report it, and realized nobody would listen. So she stayed out there, stayed close to the wash, watched and waited for someone who would. She called me," Keaton said. "For 3 days, she called from a phone that shouldn't work, from a line that's been dead for 15 years. How do you explain that?" Boaz shifted uncomfortably. "The technical people say it's impossible, but the 911 recordings are real. We all heard them. Rita logged them properly. So something happened. We just don't know what." Keaton spent 2 weeks in the hospital. His shoulder would heal, though he'd need physical therapy. The investigation expanded, reaching into 3 states, uncovering a trafficking network that had operated for decades. Marcus Landry pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against the others. The prosecutor from the county office killed himself before trial. The day Keaton was released from the hospital, he drove out to the Harker property alone, against doctor's orders. The house was surrounded by crime scene tape now, the old windmill marked as an evidence location. He walked past all of it to the line of ancient phone poles running across the desert, their wires sagging between them, connected to nothing. He followed the line to where he'd buried his phone, digging with his bare hands. The wire was there exactly as he'd left it, but when he followed it down, the phone was gone. Just the plastic wrapping remained, empty, torn as if something had pulled the device free. Keaton sat in the sand, staring at the empty wrapping. Someone had found it, or something had. The evidence was out there somewhere. Maybe in federal hands, maybe destroyed, maybe waiting to surface at some future moment when it would be needed again. His own phone rang, making him jump. He pulled it from his pocket, expecting Boaz or Rita. The screen showed no caller ID, just a number he recognized immediately. 520-555-0047. The Harker landline. Disconnected for 14 years. He answered. "Hello?" Static, wind, the sound of desert spaces. Then, so faint he might have imagined it, a woman's voice. "Thank you, Sheriff." The line went dead. Keaton stood there for a long moment, looking out across the empty desert toward the wash, where water sometimes flowed and sometimes didn't, where secrets stayed buried until storms brought them to the surface. He drove back to town and filed his report. The official record would show he'd lost his phone in the desert during the confrontation. The backup evidence in the ammunition box was enough to sustain the prosecutions anyway. The photos he'd taken were unnecessary, officially, though he sometimes wondered who had them now, and whether somewhere, a phone that shouldn't work was still carrying memory through disconnected lines, still bearing witness to things the desert wanted to keep hidden. 3 months later, Keaton retired. He'd had enough of the desert's secrets, enough of the darkness that lived alongside the light in border country. He moved north to Flagstaff, took a teaching position at the community college, tried to forget about impossible phone calls and women who'd spent 40 years alone in the wilderness doing the right thing while everyone looked away. But sometimes, late at night, his phone would ring with no caller ID. He never answered those calls anymore, but he'd listen to the voicemail they left, the brief recording of wind and static and empty space, and he'd know that somewhere out there, the desert was still keeping its secrets. Sheriff Ward Tully had driven Highway 89 through the high plateau country north of Flagstaff more times than he could count. 37 years old, 8 years as sheriff of Coconino County's northern district, he knew every curve and straightaway of the 2-lane blacktop that cut through ponderosa pine and volcanic rock formations. The elevation here ran between 6,000 and 7,000 feet, high enough that winter came early and stayed late, where summer thunderstorms built up over the San Francisco peaks and rolled across the plateau with biblical fury. It was October 2018, and the aspens were turning gold against the dark green of the pines. Tully was heading back to the county seat of Cameron after checking on a domestic disturbance call at one of the isolated ranches that dotted the landscape. The call had turned out to be nothing, a couple arguing loudly enough that a neighbor 3 miles away had heard them and gotten concerned. Small-town problems in a region where your nearest neighbor might be half an hour away. The radio crackled as he drove. "Unit 7, this is dispatch." Tully recognized Mercy Talbot's voice immediately. She'd been dispatching for the county for 12 years, unflappable and precise. If Mercy was calling him directly, instead of broadcasting to all units, something needed his specific attention. "This is Unit 7. Go ahead, Mercy." "Ward, I've got a civilian on the line reporting an abandoned school bus on Highway 89, about 15 miles north of your current position. Says it's been sitting there for at least 2 hours, no driver visible, hazard lights flashing." Tully frowned. School buses didn't just get abandoned on remote highways. Did the caller check if anyone was inside? Negative. He said he slowed down but didn't stop. Something about the situation feeling wrong. He's a long-haul trucker, name's Rook Ellison. Says he's done this route 100 times and knows what belongs and what doesn't. Give me his number. I'll call him after I check it out. Copy that. Be careful, Ward. Tully accelerated, watching the mile markers pass. 15 miles north would put the bus somewhere in the emptiest stretch of the highway, where the road ran straight across high grassland with volcanic outcroppings breaking up the monotony. Cell coverage was spotty at best, and the nearest town was 40 miles in either direction. Not a place you'd want to break down, especially with winter coming on. He saw the bus from a mile away, sitting on the shoulder with its yellow paint stark against the brown grass and gray rock. As he got closer, the hazard lights were indeed flashing, a rhythmic pulse that seemed wrong in the afternoon stillness. He pulled up behind it, leaving his own lights running, and radioed his position to Mercy before stepping out. The wind hit him immediately, cold and steady from the northwest, carrying the smell of pine and distant rain. Storm clouds were building over the peaks, dark and heavy. He'd have it maybe an hour before they rolled across the plateau. Tully approached the bus slowly, hand resting on his service weapon, taking in details. It was an older model, maybe 15 years old, painted in the standard yellow with Plateau Unified School District stenciled on the side. But something about it looked off. The paint was faded in a way that suggested more than 15 years of service, and there was rust showing through around the wheel wells and door frame. The door was closed. Tully knocked on it, called out, "Sheriff's Department. Anyone inside?" No response. He tried the door handle and found it locked. Moving to the windows, he peered inside. Empty seats, nothing visible in the driver's area. No personal belongings, no backpacks, no jackets. Just empty metal seats with cracked green vinyl and that peculiar hollow feeling of abandoned spaces. He walked around the entire vehicle, checking for damage, for signs of mechanical failure, for anything that might explain why it was here. The tires were inflated, no visible leaks. The exhaust pipe was cold to the touch, suggesting the engine hadn't been running recently. But the hazard lights continued their steady flash, which meant the battery still had charge. Tully tried calling the Plateau Unified School District office. The call went to voicemail, a recording saying the office was closed and to call back during business hours. He checked his watch. 3:40 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. School offices should be open. He left a message anyway, describing the situation and asking for a callback. He photographed the bus from multiple angles, documented the license plate, then returned to his vehicle to run the plate through the system. While he waited for the response, he called the number Mercy had given him for Rook Ellison. "This is Rook." The voice was gravelly, sounded like a man in his 50s who'd spent too many years breathing diesel fumes and truck stop coffee. "Mr. Ellison, this is Sheriff Ward Tully. I'm at the location of the bus you reported. Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" "Not much to tell, Sheriff. I was heading south on 89, probably around 1:30 this afternoon. Saw the bus sitting there with its flashers on, slowed down to see if anyone needed help. But something about it didn't sit right with me." "What do you mean?" "Hard to explain, just a feeling. The bus looked wrong somehow, like it had been sitting there longer than it should have. And the lights, they were flashing, but not quite right. Kind of flickering, you know?" Tully looked at the hazard lights. They seemed to be flashing normally now. "Did you see anyone near the vehicle? Any other cars stopped?" "Nothing. Empty highway, empty bus. That's what bothered me. If it broke down, where's the driver? If there was an emergency, where are the emergency vehicles? It just sat there by itself, and I got this feeling I shouldn't stop. So I kept going and called it in at the next truck stop." "You did the right thing. Do you remember seeing this bus on your route before?" There was a pause. "That's the thing, Sheriff. I've been running this route twice a week for 7 years. I know every vehicle that belongs to the local districts, every school, every ranch truck. I've never seen that particular bus before today." After hanging up with Ellison, Tully waited for the plate information to come back. When it did, his frown deepened. The plate was registered to Plateau Unified School District, but the vehicle information showed it as decommissioned in 2009. Nearly 10 years ago. The bus should have been sold off or scrapped, not sitting on a highway with functioning hazard lights. He called Mercy back. "I need you to contact the Plateau Unified School District Superintendent at home if necessary. I need to know the history of this vehicle and why it's out here. Copy that. Ward, I'm showing weather moving in fast. You might want to finish up before that storm hits." Tully looked at the sky. The clouds had advanced while he'd been investigating, now covering half the visible horizon. Lightning flickered in the distance, too far away to hear thunder yet. The wind was picking up, making the pines along the highway sway and moan. He decided to try to get inside the bus. The door lock was standard for school buses, designed to be opened from the outside in emergencies. Tully used his multi-tool to trip the mechanism, and the door swung open with a pneumatic hiss that made him step back reflexively. The interior smelled wrong, not the expected smell of old vinyl and diesel and the accumulated scent of hundreds of children. Instead, it smelled like ozone and cold metal and something else he couldn't identify. Something organic and faintly wrong. He climbed the steps, his boots loud on the ridged rubber flooring. The driver's seat was adjusted all the way forward, as if the last person to drive it had been unusually short. The ignition was empty, no keys. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. He checked the glove box and found nothing but an old district map from 2007 and a stack of maintenance records ending in 2008. Moving down the aisle between the seats, Tully saw something that made him stop. On one of the seats, barely visible in the dim interior light, was a child's drawing. He picked it up carefully. It was done in crayon on cheap newsprint, the kind of paper elementary schools used. The drawing showed a yellow bus and stick figures, and at the top, in uneven printing, "My Trip to the Museum," by Sarah, 2nd grade. The paper was old, yellowed, and brittle. It had been there for years. Tully continued searching, finding more small artifacts of past use. A broken pencil wedged in the crack of a seat. A faded sticker on one window showing a cartoon dinosaur. A small plastic toy soldier on the floor under the back seat. But nothing recent. Nothing to explain why the bus was here now, or who had been driving it, or where they'd gone. He was photographing the interior when his radio crackled. Mercy's voice, urgent. "Ward, I've got the superintendent on the line. He says that bus was sold to a private buyer in 2009. Some guy who wanted it for a conversion project, turning it into an RV or something. Paid cash, towed it away. The district hasn't had contact with it since." Did he remember the buyer's name? "Hang on." A pause. The sound of muffled conversation. Then Mercy came back. "Name was Garrett something. The superintendent is looking for the bill of sale paperwork. He'll call you back." Tully stepped off the bus and walked around it again, this time looking for any indication of the conversion work. But the exterior was unchanged. Still looked exactly like a school bus. No windows cut for RV modifications. No propane tanks. No additional storage compartments. Either the buyer had never started the project, or this wasn't the same bus despite the matching plate number. The first drops of rain started falling, fat and cold. The storm was here. Tully made a decision. He couldn't leave the bus sitting on the highway, abandoned and unexplained. It was a hazard, and the weather was getting worse. He'd have to arrange for it to be towed to the county impound yard where it could be properly searched and investigated. He was walking back to his vehicle to call for a tow truck when he noticed something that stopped him cold. In the dirt and gravel on the shoulder, between where the bus sat and where the pavement began, there were tracks. Footprints. Small ones, like a child might make. Multiple sets, all leading from the bus door toward the highway, then disappearing at the pavement edge. Tully knelt down, examining them closely. They were fresh. Made recently in soft dirt that would have been hardened by the sun if they'd been there for more than a few hours. But there were no children. The trucker had reported seeing the empty bus at 1:30. These tracks had been made sometime between then and now. He looked around at the empty landscape. Nothing but grass and rock and scattered pines stretching to the horizon in all directions. No buildings, no vehicles, nowhere for children to have gone. The highway itself was empty, no traffic visible in either direction. His radio crackled again. "Ward, I'm getting reports of a missing school bus from Marble Canyon Elementary. Teacher called in saying their bus never arrived to pick up the kids this afternoon. Says the driver is a woman named Patricia Voss, very reliable, never missed a run in 12 years. Tully felt his pulse quicken. What kind of bus? Older model yellow. Plateau Unified District. They're sending me the plate number now. Mercy. Is it possible their bus is the same one I'm looking at? Negative. Different plate numbers. But Ward, here's the strange part. The teacher said she tried calling Patricia's cell phone and it went straight to voicemail. So she called Patricia's emergency contact, her sister. The sister says Patricia's bus broke down last week and is in the shop. She's been driving a rental car, so there shouldn't even be a bus to be missing. Tully stared at the abandoned vehicle, at the flickering hazard lights, at the small footprints leading nowhere. The rain was falling harder now, starting to wash away the tracks. Mercy, I need you to call Marble Canyon Elementary back. Ask them to confirm the last time they actually saw their bus, physically saw it, not just assuming it existed because it was on the schedule, and find out if they've had any students absent today, any children who didn't show up. Copy that. Ward, what are you thinking? He wasn't sure, but something about this felt wrong in a way that went beyond a simple abandoned vehicle. The decommissioned bus that shouldn't exist, the footprints of children who weren't there, the flickering lights and the smell of ozone. It reminded him of other calls he'd taken over the years, incidents that never quite made sense, that got filed away under unexplained, because there was no rational explanation to be found. The Plateau country had a reputation for strange occurrences. The Navajo called certain areas troubled, places where things didn't work the way they should. Most of the old-timers Tully knew had stories about livestock that vanished without a trace, lights that appeared where no light should be, sounds that carried across impossible distances. Tully had always filed such stories under local color, the kind of folklore that grows up in isolated places where the land is harsh and distances are vast. But standing here in the rain, looking at an impossible bus and vanishing footprints, he found himself wondering if maybe the old-timers knew something he didn't. The radio crackled. Ward, I've got something. Marble Canyon Elementary confirms their bus was scrapped 3 years ago. They've been contracting with a private company for student transport since then. Whatever bus they thought they had, it doesn't exist. And Ward, they're reporting 4 students absent today. 4 kids who got on the morning bus, but whose parents say never came home. Tully's hand tightened on the radio. Names. I need the names and descriptions of those children. While Mercy gathered that information, Tully returned to the bus, rain now soaking through his uniform. He climbed aboard again, moving down the aisle, looking at those empty seats with new understanding. 4 absent children. 4 sets of small footprints leading away from a bus that shouldn't exist. On the back seat, he found something he'd missed before. 4 backpacks, lined up neatly in a row. Inside them, school books and homework folders with names written in careful child handwriting. Sarah Kellerman, age 7. Marcus Downing, age 8. Emma and Ethan Marsh, twins, age 9. The 4 missing children from Marble Canyon Elementary. Tully stood in the back of the empty bus, rain hammering on the metal roof, and tried to understand what he was looking at. The children had been here. Their belongings proved it. But they were gone now, walked away from the bus according to the footprints and disappeared into the empty plateau. His phone buzzed. A text from Mercy. Superintendent found the paperwork. Bus sold to Garrett Voss in 2009. Ward, Patricia Voss, the missing bus driver? Her husband was named Garrett. He died in 2011 in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 89. His vehicle went off the road during a storm. They found him 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine. He'd been driving a converted school bus trying to make it to California. Investigation showed brake failure, but the weather was so bad they couldn't rule out other factors. Tully looked out the bus windows at the storm-darkened landscape. A school bus driven by a dead man's widow, picking up children who shouldn't have gotten on it. An impossible vehicle appearing on a highway in the exact area where the driver's husband had died 7 years ago. He radioed for backup, for search teams, for everyone available. 4 children were missing, and he had no idea where they'd gone or how to find them. But as he stood there in the empty bus, he heard something that made his skin crawl. From outside, faint but distinct, the sound of children laughing, playing, calling to each other in voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He ran to the door and looked out into the rain. Nothing. Empty highway. Empty land. But the voices continued, echoing across the plateau, seeming to move with the wind. Tully grabbed his flashlight and started walking in the direction the footprints had led, into the rain and the gathering darkness, toward sounds that shouldn't be there, searching for children who had vanished into the empty spaces of the high plateau where the land played tricks, and nothing was quite what it seemed. Tully moved through the rain-soaked grassland, his flashlight beam cutting through the downpour, sweeping back and forth across terrain that offered no answers. The voices had faded as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving only the sound of rain hammering against rock and earth. He'd walked maybe 200 yards from the bus, following the general direction the footprints had led before the rain washed them away completely, and found nothing. No children, no additional tracks, no sign that anyone had passed this way recently. His radio crackled with Mercy's voice, distorted by static from the storm. "Ward, I've got units responding to your location. ETA 20 minutes. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but with this weather, they're saying it'll be at least an hour before they can deploy helicopters." "Copy that." "Mercy, I need everything we have on Patricia Voss. Employment history, residence, family, medical records if we can access them. And I need someone to locate her right now. If she's at home, send a unit to bring her in for questioning. If she's not home, I need to know where she is." "Already on it. Ward, the parents of those missing kids are starting to call in. They're panicked. What do I tell them?" Tully stood in the rain, looking back toward the yellow bus barely visible through the downpour. What could he tell them? That their children had gotten on a bus that didn't exist, driven by a woman whose husband had died in an identical vehicle 7 years ago. That the children had apparently walked away from the bus and vanished into empty plateau country during a rainstorm. Tell them we're conducting an active search and we'll update them as soon as we have information. Tell them to stay by their phones in case their children try to contact them. And Mercy, get me the exact location where Garrett Voss went off the road in 2011. I want coordinates. He returned to the bus as the first county units arrived, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Deputy Frank Sutherland emerged from his vehicle, a bulky man in his 50s who'd worked the plateau country longer than Tully had been alive. Behind him came Deputy Carla Martinez, young and sharp-eyed, only 2 years on the force but already proving herself capable. Tully briefed them quickly, showing them the backpacks, the maintenance records, the impossibility of what they were looking at. Sutherland's weathered face grew grimmer with each detail. "Sheriff, I was on duty when Garrett Voss went off the road back in 2011, Sutherland said. Responded to the accident scene. It was bad. He'd been trying to outrun a storm, going too fast for the conditions. The bus went through a guardrail and dropped 60 feet into a ravine. When we found him, he'd been dead for at least 2 days. The bus was totaled, burned up after the crash." "Burned up?" Tully looked at the pristine yellow vehicle sitting in front of them. "You're sure?" "Positive. The fuel tank ruptured on impact. Fire consumed most of the interior. There wasn't enough left to salvage. The insurance company had it crushed and disposed of." Martinez spoke up, her voice careful. "Sheriff, if that bus was destroyed, then what are we looking at right now?" That was the question. Tully walked around the vehicle again, examining it more closely. The paint was faded, yes, but there was no damage. No dents, no scratches beyond normal wear, no indication this vehicle had ever been in an accident. The VIN plate on the dashboard matched the registration. By every physical measure, this was the same bus that had been decommissioned in 2009 and sold to Garrett Voss. Sutherland, you said the bus burned. What about Voss's personal effects? Was anything recovered? Some clothing, his wallet, wedding ring. Patricia claimed the body and what little else there was. She took it pretty hard from what I remember. They'd only been married a few years, no kids. After the funeral, she kind of withdrew. Stopped coming into town much. Then about 3 years ago, she started driving school bus for the district. I always figured she needed the money and the company. Tully's radio crackled. Ward, this is Mercy. I've got a unit at Patricia Voss's residence. House is empty, no vehicle in the driveway. Neighbors say they haven't seen her in 2 days. 2 days. Tully felt the pieces shifting, trying to form a pattern he couldn't quite see. Check with her employer, the contract bus company. Find out when she last reported for work. While they waited for that information, more units arrived. The highway was becoming crowded with emergency vehicles, their lights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. A command post was being established, search and rescue deploying despite the weather, spreading out across the plateau in teams. The parents of the missing children had been brought to the county building in Cameron, waiting in a conference room, desperate for news. Tully stood under a portable shelter that had been erected near the bus, studying a topographical map of the area. The terrain was deceptive. What looked like flat grassland was actually cut through with dozens of small ravines and washes, places where the earth had been carved away by centuries of water erosion. A child could be within 100 yards and remain completely hidden in one of those depressions. 4 children could be sheltering from the rain, lost and scared, calling out for help that wouldn't reach beyond the sound of the storm. But he kept thinking about those voices he'd heard, the laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. That hadn't sounded like children lost and scared. That had sounded like children playing, carefree and happy, completely unaware of the panic their disappearance had caused. Mercy came through on the radio again. Ward, the contract company says Patricia Voss called in sick yesterday morning, said she had the flu and wouldn't be driving her route. They assigned a substitute driver. Patricia was supposed to return to work tomorrow. Her supervisor says it's the first sick day she's taken in 3 years. What about her personal vehicle? She drives a 2014 Ford Explorer, gray. I'm putting out a bolo now. Tully thought about the timeline. Patricia called in sick yesterday, which meant she'd been unaccounted for at least 36 hours. The bus appeared on Highway 89 sometime between this morning and early afternoon. The children disappeared from Marble Canyon Elementary, which was 40 miles east of here. How did they get from the school to this bus? The elementary school had confirmed their regular contracted bus had picked up students this morning, dropped them off, made all its runs normally. The missing children should have been in class all day. He called the school directly, getting the principal on the line. This is Sheriff Tully. I need you to check your attendance records very carefully. The 4 missing children, when exactly were they marked absent? There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. Sheriff, that's the strange thing. They were marked present for morning classes. It wasn't until the afternoon dismissal that anyone realized they were gone. The teacher assumed they'd gone to the library or the nurse's office. By the time we did a full building search, it was after 3 o'clock. So they disappeared sometime between lunch and dismissal. It appears so. But Sheriff, we've reviewed all our security footage. Those children never left the building. They're not on any of the exit cameras. They just vanished from inside the school. Tully thanked the principal and ended the call, his mind racing. Children who vanished from a locked school building and turned up in a bus that shouldn't exist, 40 miles away across empty plateau country. None of it made sense through any rational framework. Deputy Martinez approached, holding an evidence bag. Sheriff, we found this on one of the bus seats. Thought you should see it." Inside the bag was a photograph, old and faded, showing a family. Tully recognized Patricia Voss, younger, smiling, standing next to a man who must have been Garrett. But what caught his attention was the background. They were standing in front of a yellow school bus, the same bus he was looking at now, and between them were 4 children. Not their children. The ages weren't right. These looked like children they were posing with, maybe students on a field trip or a church group. But something about the image disturbed him. The children's faces were slightly blurred, as if they'd moved just as the shutter clicked, and their expressions, even through the blur, seemed wrong somehow. Too happy, almost manic, like the exaggerated smiles in old photographs where subjects held their pose too long. He turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, "Last trip, June 2009. May we find our way home." June 2009 was when the bus had been decommissioned. Tully felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Last trip. May we find our way home. What had happened on that last trip? "Martinez, get on the phone with Plateau Unified. I need to know everything about this bus's final route in June 2009. Where it went, who was on it, any incidents reported." Everything. The storm was intensifying, lightning striking close enough that the thunder was immediate and deafening. The search and rescue teams were reporting 0 visibility, forcing them to suspend operations until the weather cleared. The children, if they were out there, would be exposed to this, hypothermia setting in fast at this elevation and temperature. Tully made a decision. "Sutherland, I want every available unit doing a grid search along Highway 89, 5 miles in each direction from this location. Focus on ravines, washes, any natural shelter. Martinez, stay with the bus, process everything. I'm going to check something." "Where are you going, Sheriff?" Sutherland asked. "I'm going to find where Garrett Voss went off the road." He pulled up the coordinates Mercy had sent him and started driving north. The accident site was 3 miles up the highway, marked now only by a replacement section of guardrail that looked newer than the rest. Tully parked and walked to the edge, looking down into the ravine. 60 feet, Sutherland had said. In daylight, you could see the bottom, see where the bus had come to rest and burned. Now, in the storm and failing light, it was just darkness. But as Tully stood there, he heard something that made him freeze. From down in the ravine, barely audible over the storm, came the sound of a vehicle engine. Not running smoothly, but coughing and sputtering, like an engine trying to start in cold weather. And behind it, more faint, the sound of children's voices, not laughing this time, crying, calling for help. Tully grabbed his flashlight and started climbing down, using the rocks and sparse vegetation for handholds. The slope was steep and slick with rain, and twice he nearly lost his footing. But the sounds pulled him down, the struggling engine and the frightened voices. At the bottom of the ravine, he found himself in a rocky channel where water was starting to flow from the storm runoff. His flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing nothing but boulders and scrub brush. No vehicle, no children. But the sounds continued, seeming to come from the rocks themselves. He moved deeper into the ravine, following a path that led around a massive boulder. Behind it, he found something that stopped him cold. Burned metal, twisted and blackened, half buried in sediment. The remains of a vehicle, barely recognizable as a bus. This was Garrett Voss's crash site, or what was left of it after 7 years of weather and erosion. But the sounds were coming from the wreckage. The engine sound, the crying voices, all emanating from this burned-out shell that couldn't possibly contain either. Tully approached carefully, flashlight beam probing the shadows. The front section of the bus was completely destroyed. The windshield gone, the driver's area crushed and charred. The passenger section was in slightly better condition, the metal seats still visible beneath the carbon scoring. And on one of those seats, untouched by fire or decay, sat a small backpack. It looked brand new, the fabric clean and bright. Tully picked it up, opened it. Inside were school books with today's date stamped on the homework assignments. The name on the folder, Emma Marsh, one of the missing children. The crying sounds grew louder, more desperate. Tully spun around, his light catching movement in the shadows. For just a moment, he saw them. 4 children, standing at the edge of his flashlight beam, their forms translucent and flickering like bad television reception. They were soaking wet, shivering, reaching toward him with small hands. Their mouths moved, forming words he could barely hear over the storm. "Help us. We can't find the way. She promised to take us home." Then they were gone, vanished like they'd never been there. Tully stood alone in the ravine with Emma Marsh's backpack. The rain pouring down, the burned-out wreckage of Garrett Voss's bus looming behind him like a monument to tragedy. His radio crackled with Mercy's voice. "Ward, Martinez got the records from the district. That bus's last trip in June 2009 was a field trip to Sunset Crater. Patricia Voss was the driver. She had 4 students on board. The trip was uneventful according to the reports. Everyone returned safely. But Ward, here's what's strange. The district has no record of who those 4 students were. The permission slips are missing. The roster was never filed properly. It's like they deliberately didn't document who was on that bus." Tully climbed back up to the highway, his mind working through impossible scenarios. Patricia had driven the bus on its last trip with 4 children whose identities weren't recorded. Now, 9 years later, 4 different children had vanished, and Patricia had disappeared with them. The bus that had been destroyed in the crash had somehow appeared on the highway intact, with the missing children's belongings inside. He drove back to the scene where Martinez was still processing the bus. The rain was starting to ease, the storm moving east across the plateau. In the clearing sky, stars were becoming visible, cold and distant. "Martinez, check those backpacks again. I need to know if anything else is in them besides school materials." She went through each pack methodically. In the bottom of Sarah Kellerman's backpack, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture, she found an old Polaroid photograph. It showed 4 children, different children than the ones in the earlier photo, standing in front of a school bus, the same bus they were searching now. On the back was written, "Field Trip, June 2009. "Sheriff," Martinez said slowly, "these are the children from that last trip. The ones whose names weren't recorded. I recognize one of them. This girl here, with the red hair. That's Amanda Sutherland, Frank Sutherland's daughter. She went missing in June 2009. Tully felt his world shift. Sutherland's daughter? He never mentioned. He doesn't talk about it. Nobody does. It's like the town made an agreement to pretend it never happened. Amanda and 3 other kids disappeared during a field trip. They were on a bus that left Sunset Crater and never arrived back at school. Massive search went on for weeks. The kids were never found. No trace, no bodies, nothing. The driver was Patricia Voss. She claimed she dropped them at the school, watched them go inside. But teachers said the bus never arrived. Patricia nearly had a breakdown over it. Insisted she remembered the drop-off. Eventually, the investigation stalled. Some people thought Patricia had done something to those kids. Others thought they'd run away or been abducted. The case is still open, but nothing's happened in 9 years. Tully looked at the photograph in his hand, at the 4 children who'd been missing since 2009, and at the evidence of 4 different children missing now. "Mercy, get Sutherland on the radio. I need him back at this location immediately." While they waited, Tully walked through the timeline again. Patricia Voss drives 4 children on a field trip in June 2009. The children vanish. Patricia is suspected but never charged due to lack of evidence. She spirals into depression and isolation. Her husband, trying to escape the stigma and start fresh, takes the old bus and attempts to drive to California. He dies in a crash during a storm. Patricia stays in the area, eventually returns to driving school bus. And now, 9 years after the first disappearance, 4 more children vanish in circumstances that mirror the original incident. Sutherland arrived, his face ashen when Martinez showed him the photograph. "That's Amanda," he said, his voice breaking. "That's my daughter. Where did you find this?" "In the backpack of one of the children who disappeared today," Tully said. "Frank, I need you to tell me everything about that case. Everything that was kept out of the reports." Sutherland was quiet for a long moment, rain dripping from his hat brim. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Patricia didn't hurt those kids. I never believed she did. But something happened on that bus trip. Something nobody could explain. The kids who came back from that field trip, the ones who weren't missing, they all told the same story. They said Patricia pulled over along Highway 89 because she saw something on the road. She got out to check, and when she came back, she seemed different, like she was in a trance. She drove them to Sunset Crater like normal, but at the monument, 4 of the kids, including Amanda, said they wanted to wait in the bus. Patricia let them. When she came back from the visitor center with the rest of the group, those 4 were gone. Just vanished. Patricia searched, called for help, but they were gone." "What did she see on the road?" Tully asked. "She never could say for sure. Kept describing it as a shimmer, like heat haze, but it was cloudy that day. She walked into it, and when she came out, she felt like time had jumped forward. The other kids said she was only gone for a minute, but she felt like it had been longer." Tully remembered the voices he'd heard, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The children appearing and disappearing in the ravine. The sense that reality was somehow thin here, that the normal rules didn't quite apply. The Plateau country had always had that reputation, places where people got lost in ways that defied explanation. "Frank, where exactly did Patricia stop? Where did she see this shimmer?" Sutherland pointed up the highway. "About a mile north of here, there's a turnout with a historical marker. She pulled over there." They drove to the location, all 3 of them crowded into Tully's vehicle. The turnout was small, just enough room for a vehicle to pull safely off the road. The historical marker was weathered and hard to read. Something about ancient trade routes and the indigenous peoples who'd lived here for centuries before European contact. Tully got out and walked the area, playing his flashlight across the ground. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then Martinez called out, "Sheriff, over here." She was standing at the edge of the turnout, where the ground sloped down toward a shallow wash. In the mud, illuminated by her flashlight, were tire tracks, fresh tracks made by a large vehicle. The tracks led down into the wash and disappeared into a culvert that passed under the highway. Tully approached the culvert opening. It was maybe 6 feet in diameter, large enough to walk through if you hunched over. His flashlight beam penetrated maybe 20 feet before the tunnel curved, and the light was swallowed by darkness. From inside came a sound that made his skin crawl. Children's laughter, echoing strangely in the confined space. And beneath it, that struggling engine sound he'd heard in the ravine. "Martinez, call for backup. Everyone you can get, and get lights down here, lots of them. Sheriff, you're not going in there alone. I'm not going in at all until we have proper support and equipment. But I need to know what's in there." They waited while units assembled, while portable lights were brought in and set up, while the entrance to the culvert was illuminated like a stage. The sounds from inside continued, sometimes loud, sometimes fading to almost nothing. Tully could hear Mercy coordinating on the radio, could hear the parents of the missing children demanding answers, could hear the tension in everyone's voice as they tried to understand what they were dealing with. When they finally had enough personnel and equipment, Tully led a team into the culvert. The space was cramped and claustrophobic, water flowing around their boots from the storm runoff. The concrete walls were covered in graffiti, old markings from decades of travelers and drifters passing through. But as they moved deeper, the graffiti changed. It became more deliberate, almost ritualistic. Symbols he didn't recognize, dates going back to the 1970s, names and messages. We couldn't find our way back. The road goes both directions. She's still driving. The culvert opened into a larger chamber where several drainage channels converged. And there, in the center of the chamber, illuminated by their flashlights, sat a yellow school bus. It was the same bus they'd found on the highway. Same paint, same rust patterns, same faded district lettering. But it was also the burned wreckage from the ravine. The vehicle seemed to flicker between states, solid one moment, scorched and broken the next. The hazard lights were flashing, impossibly bright in the darkness, and through the windows they could see movement. Children, 4 of them, sitting in the seats, their faces pressed against the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. And in the driver's seat, visible in profile, Patricia Voss. Her hands on the wheel, her eyes fixed forward, driving a bus that was simultaneously moving and standing still. Tully stood frozen, his flashlight beam locked on the impossible scene before him. The bus flickered like a badly tuned television signal, existing in 2 states simultaneously. One moment it was pristine, yellow paint gleaming in the harsh light, windows intact, hazard lights pulsing their steady rhythm. The next moment it was the charred wreckage from the ravine. Metal twisted and blackened, windows blown out, seats reduced to skeletal frames. The transitions happened so fast they made his eyes hurt, made his brain struggle to process what he was seeing. Behind him, he heard Martinez whisper, "Mother of God." Sutherland had gone pale, his hand moving unconsciously to his sidearm, as if a weapon could protect them from whatever this was. The other deputies who'd followed them into the culvert were backing away, their training failing them in the face of something that violated every law of nature they understood. But it was the children that held Tully's attention. 4 faces pressed against the windows, their features distorting as the bus flickered between states. In the intact version, they looked terrified but alive, their mouths forming words he couldn't hear, their small hands slapping against the glass. In the burned version, they were shadows, outlines of ash and carbon, still moving, still trapped. And Patricia Voss sat in the driver's seat, her body rigid, hands locked on the steering wheel. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on some distant point only she could perceive. Her lips moved constantly, forming the same words over and over. Tully couldn't hear her through the glass and the strange distortion that surrounded the bus, but he could read her lips well enough. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Tully forced himself to move forward, his boots splashing through the water that had collected in the drainage chamber. The air around the bus felt wrong, electric and cold, making his skin prickle with goosebumps despite the humidity. As he got closer, the flickering intensified, the transitions between states happening so rapidly that the bus seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. "Sheriff, don't get any closer," Martinez called out, her voice tight with fear. "We don't know what that thing is or what it might do." But Tully kept moving. 4 children were in there, possibly still alive in some sense he didn't understand. He was sheriff of this county, sworn to protect its residents, and that oath didn't come with an exemption for situations that defied explanation. He approached the bus door, which hung open in the intact version, was blown off in the burned version. The flickering made it hard to judge distances, made each step feel like walking through a strobe light. He reached the door and looked up the steps into the interior. The driver's seat was maybe 10 feet away. Patricia's head turned slowly toward him, the movement jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Her eyes focused on him, and Tully saw recognition there, along with something that looked like relief mixed with terror. Her mouth formed different words now. "Help them, please. They've been lost for so long." Tully tried to speak, found his throat dry. He swallowed and tried again. "Patricia, I need you to let those children off the bus. Their parents are waiting for them." She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. "They can't get off. None of us can. We're stuck in the between place, not coming, not going, just driving forever." The between place? Where I took them. Where Garrett went. Where we all go when we don't know which road leads home. Her voice was faint, coming from very far away despite the short distance between them. "I tried to bring them back. I tried so hard, but I got lost too. We're all lost now." Behind Tully, Sutherland had moved closer, drawn despite his fear. "Amanda," he called out. "Amanda, baby, it's Dad. Come on out now. It's okay." One of the children turned toward the sound of his voice. Even through the distortion and flickering, Tully could see the resemblance. Amanda Sutherland, who'd been missing since 2009. She pressed her hand against the window, her small face crumpling with emotion. Her mouth formed a single word. "Daddy." But she didn't move toward the door. Couldn't move, Tully realized. The children were as trapped as Patricia, caught in whatever strange state the bus occupied. Martinez had her radio out, trying to raise Mercy at dispatch. The signal was breaking up, her transmission fragmenting into static. "This is Unit 3, in the culvert system. We've found the children need assistance." The radio squealed with feedback, then went dead. All their radios died simultaneously, the sudden silence somehow louder than the static had been. The only sound was the water flowing through the drainage channels and that awful struggling engine noise coming from the bus, like a motor trying to turn over but never quite catching. "We need to get them out," Sutherland said, moving toward the bus door. "My daughter is right there. We can't just leave them." Tully grabbed his arm. "Frank, stop. We don't know what will happen if we try to physically interact with it. That bus is in 2 places at once, 2 times at once. If we try to force our way in, we might make things worse." "Worse?" "My daughter has been missing for 9 years. She's right there, 10 feet away. How could it possibly get worse?" Before Tully could answer, the bus flickered more violently, the transitions accelerating. For a moment, the intact version solidified completely, looking as real and solid as any vehicle Tully had ever seen. The hazard lights pulsed brighter, and the engine sound shifted, no longer struggling but roaring to life. Patricia's hands tightened on the wheel, and the bus lurched forward. Everyone jumped back as the vehicle moved, its tires somehow finding traction on the wet concrete floor of the drainage chamber. It rolled forward maybe 5 feet, then stopped, the engine dying back to that struggling sputter. But it had moved. The impossible bus had physically moved in the real world. "It's trying to drive," Martinez said. "She's trying to complete the route, trying to bring them home." Tully understood suddenly. Patricia hadn't kidnapped those children in 2009. She'd tried to bring them back, tried to complete her route, but something had gone wrong. They'd gotten caught in some kind of loop, endlessly attempting a journey they could never complete. And when Garrett had died in the crash, trying to escape the guilt and stigma by leaving in the same bus, he'd somehow reinforced the loop. added his own energy to the impossible situation. Now, Patricia was trying again, using the anniversary of the original disappearance. The same stretch of highway, the same conditions. She'd taken 4 more children, not out of malice, but because she thought she could fix it. Thought she could finally complete the route if she recreated the exact circumstances. But she'd only succeeded in adding more lost souls to the loop. "We need to help her complete the route," Tully said. "That's the only way to break this. She needs to finish what she started, needs to bring those children home." "How?" Sutherland demanded. "That bus can barely exist, let alone drive, and where would it even go? Home is 40 miles from here, and that thing is underground in a drainage culvert." Tully thought about the topographical maps he'd studied, about the network of washes and culverts that ran under and around the plateau. The indigenous peoples had used these routes for centuries, knowing paths through the landscape that modern maps didn't show. The historical marker at the turnout had mentioned ancient trade routes. Maybe Patricia had stumbled onto something older than the highway, older than the modern boundaries they'd drawn across the land. "Martinez, when we were processing the bus on the highway, you found maintenance records. What was the last entry?" She pulled out her notebook, flipping through pages until she found it. "June 15th, 2009. Final route check before decommissioning. Route 89 north Marble Canyon Elementary to Sunset Crater and return. Signed off by Patricia Voss." "And where are we now, relative to that route?" Martinez looked at the map on her phone, trying to get their GPS coordinates. The signal was weak, but functional. We're almost exactly at the midpoint. This drainage system runs parallel to Highway 89. If the bus was trying to complete its route underground, following the old water channels, it would pass through here on the way from Marble Canyon to Sunset Crater. Tully looked back at the bus, at Patricia's desperate face, at the children who'd been trapped for 9 years, and the ones who'd been missing for less than a day. A plan was forming in his mind. Insane and impossible, but the only thing that made sense given the insane impossibility they were dealing with. "We're going to guide her," he said. "We're going to light the path and make sure she can complete the route. If this bus is trying to drive through the drainage system, we're going to help it get where it's going." "Sheriff, that's crazy," Martinez said. "Even if we wanted to, we don't have the equipment or personnel to. Then we get them. Mercy's probably organizing a rescue operation topside right now. We redirect that operation. We map every culvert, every drainage channel between here and Sunset Crater. We place lights, we place personnel, we create a path for that bus to follow." Sutherland was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want to help a ghost bus drive through the underground drainage system of the plateau. You have a better idea for getting your daughter back?" That shut Sutherland up. After a moment, he nodded slowly. Okay, let's say we try this. What's to stop the bus from just flickering out of existence or getting stuck again or trapping more people in its loop?" "Nothing," Tully admitted. "But doing nothing guarantees those children stay lost. At least this gives them a chance." They retreated from the bus, backing out of the drainage chamber and up through the culvert to the surface. The fresh air was a shock after the claustrophobic darkness below. Emergency vehicles still lined the highway, their lights painting the landscape in urgent colors. Mercy was there, coordinating with search and rescue teams, and her face flooded with relief when she saw Tully emerge. "Ward, thank God. Your radios went dead. We thought, what did you find down there?" "Something impossible." "Mercy, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane, and I need you to trust me enough to do it anyway." He explained his plan, watching her expression shift from relief to confusion to outright disbelief. But to her credit, she didn't dismiss him or suggest he'd been breathing too much carbon monoxide in the culvert. She just listened, asked clarifying questions, and then started making calls. Within an hour, they had teams mobilizing across the plateau. County engineers were pulling up maps of the drainage system, identifying every culvert and wash that connected the area where they'd found the bus to the vicinity of Sunset Crater. Search and rescue volunteers were being positioned at key points along the route, and Tully had called in every favor he had to get portable lighting equipment, the kind used for nighttime road construction, delivered to strategic locations. The parents of the missing children had been told that a rescue operation was underway, but not the details. How could Tully explain that their children were trapped in a bus that existed outside normal time and space, and that his plan to save them involved helping that bus complete an impossible underground journey? They'd think he'd lost his mind. He wasn't entirely sure they'd be wrong. By midnight, the network was in place. Lights marked the path through the drainage system like runway markers, glowing in the darkness. Teams were stationed at every culvert opening, ready to track the bus's progress if it moved. And Tully was back in the chamber where the bus sat flickering, along with Sutherland and Martinez. "This is either the bravest thing I've ever done or the stupidest," Martinez said, checking her equipment. "Probably both," Tully agreed. He approached the bus again, moving slowly, hands visible. Patricia's eyes tracked him, desperate and hopeful. "Patricia, we're going to help you. We've lit the path. You need to drive. You need to finish the route." "I don't know if I can." Her voice came from far away. "I've been trying for so long. Every time I think I'm close, I end up back here, back at the beginning. That's because you've been trying alone. This time, you have help. We're with you, all the way to the end." He pulled out his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness of the culvert beyond the chamber. "Follow the light. 1 foot at a time. 1 mile at a time. Don't think about the whole journey, just the next step." The bus flickered again, and for a moment the burned version dominated, charred and broken. But then it shifted back, and the engine sound changed. It was still struggling, but there was purpose to it now. A rhythm that suggested forward motion was possible. Patricia's hands moved on the wheel, turning it slightly. The bus began to roll forward, slow but steady, following Tully's flashlight beam out of the chamber and into the connecting tunnel. Tully walked backward, keeping the light steady, while Sutherland and Martinez followed on either side. The journey through the drainage system was surreal. The bus moved at maybe 5 miles an hour, never quite solid, never quite ghost, existing in that flickering between state. Water sloshed around its tires, or didn't, depending on which version was dominant at any given moment. The children inside pressed their faces to the windows, watching the tunnel walls slide past, hope and terror mingling in their expressions. Tully's radio crackled back to life as they moved away from the initial chamber. Mercy's voice came through clearer now. "Ward, we're tracking your progress. You're approaching Junction Point 3. Teams are in position." They emerged from the first culvert into a larger wash where 3 drainage channels converged. The teams Mercy had positioned were there, their lights illuminating the space like a stadium. The bus hesitated, and for a moment Tully thought it would stall, would get stuck in this new location and trap them all in an endless loop. But Patricia kept driving, following the lights that marked the path, and the bus rolled forward into the next tunnel. Mile by mile, they progressed through the underground network, following routes that hadn't been traveled since before the highways existed, paths that the water had carved over centuries and that humans had repurposed for modern drainage. At each junction, teams reported the bus's passage. Its progress was being tracked on the surface, a glowing dot on a digital map moving steadily northwest toward Sunset Crater. News crews had shown up, despite Mercy's attempts to keep the operation quiet. Helicopters circled overhead, their lights visible through occasional drainage grates. The story was spreading. Sheriff leads ghost bus through underground maze to save missing children. It sounded like something from a supermarket tabloid. Tully didn't care. He kept walking backward, kept the light steady, kept talking to Patricia through the windshield. "You're doing great. Keep going. Just a little further." Hours passed. Tully's legs burned with exhaustion. His voice was hoarse from talking, but the bus kept moving. They'd traveled nearly 20 miles through the drainage system, a journey that should have been impossible for a vehicle this size through tunnels never designed for traffic. And then, finally, they emerged into the large detention basin near Sunset Crater National Monument. The basin was designed to collect runoff during storms, a huge concrete bowl that could hold thousands of gallons before releasing it into the watershed. Now, it was dry, and its walls were lined with emergency vehicles and spectators who'd somehow learned of the operation. The bus rolled into the basin, and for the first time since entering the culvert system, it stopped flickering. It solidified, became fully real and present. The hazard lights stopped flashing. The engine sound faded to nothing. And in the sudden silence, they heard a new sound, the bus door opening with its characteristic hydraulic hiss. Patricia Voss stood up from the driver's seat, moving stiffly, like someone waking from a long sleep. She turned toward the children and said in a voice that seemed to come from the present instead of across years of trauma, "Okay, kids, we're here. Everybody off the bus." The 4 children from today, Sarah Kellerman, Marcus Downing, and the twins Emma and Ethan Marsh, stood up and walked down the aisle. They moved like sleepwalkers, confused and disoriented, but they moved. They descended the stairs and stepped out into the basin, where paramedics immediately rushed forward to check on them. But it was what happened next that made Tully's throat tighten with emotion. 4 more children stood up from seats that had appeared empty moments before. Older children, or rather, children who should have been older but looked exactly the same as they had 9 years ago. Amanda Sutherland was first, her red hair unmistakable. Behind her came 3 others, faces that matched the missing persons photos from 2009. They descended the stairs and stepped out into the night air. Frank Sutherland caught his daughter as she stumbled, pulling her into his arms, his face streaming with tears. The other 3 children stood looking around in confusion, until they saw faces in the crowd, saw their parents who'd been waiting 9 years for this moment. Patricia was the last to exit the bus. She stood at the top of the steps, looking at Tully with eyes that held both exhaustion and peace. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have found the way without you." "Where's Garrett?" Tully asked. "Your husband, is he—" "He's free now," Patricia said. "He's been trapped in that crash for 7 years, replaying it over and over. But when I completed the route, when I brought them all home, the loop broke. He could finally let go." She looked back at the bus, and Tully saw something shift in the driver's seat, a shadow that might have been a man, raising a hand in farewell before fading completely. "What about you?" Tully asked. "Are you free?" Patricia smiled sadly. "I will be, once I face what I did. Once I explain why I thought taking 4 more children was the answer instead of just asking for help." She held out her wrists. "I'm ready to accept responsibility." Tully called Martinez over to handle the arrest. Patricia Voss would face charges for the abduction of 4 children, though Tully suspected the prosecution would be complicated by the circumstances. How do you explain to a jury that she was trying to break a temporal loop caused by an earlier incident that defied rational explanation? But that was a problem for later. Right now, 8 children were being reunited with their families. 8 children who'd been lost were found. The children from 2009 would need extensive medical and psychological evaluation. They hadn't aged a day in 9 years, hadn't experienced the passage of time. For them, it had been moments since they'd boarded that bus for a field trip. For their families, nearly a decade had passed. The bus sat in the detention basin, solid and real and utterly mundane now. A team from the state police would impound it, process it as evidence. Mechanics would examine it. Forensic teams would go over every inch. They'd find a decommissioned school bus that had somehow ended up at Sunset Crater after traveling 20 miles through drainage culverts barely large enough to accommodate it. They'd find no rational explanation, because none existed. Tully stood watching the reunions, the tears and embraces, the impossible joy of families made whole again. Mercy came to stand beside him, her face tired but satisfied. "We did it," she said. "I still don't understand how, but we did it." "Neither do I," Tully admitted. "But sometimes understanding isn't the point. Sometimes you just do what needs to be done and let someone else worry about the explanation." Rook Ellison, the truck driver who'd first reported the bus, had shown up at some point during the operation. He approached Tully now, his weathered face thoughtful. "Sheriff, I've been driving these roads for a long time. Seen things I couldn't explain. Learned to trust my instincts about what's natural and what isn't. That bus I saw this afternoon, I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong." "You did the right thing calling it in." "Did I? Because part of me wonders if maybe some things are supposed to stay lost. Maybe there are routes we're not supposed to follow, places we're not meant to go." Tully thought about Patricia's description of the between place, that space where the bus had been trapped. A nowhere land that was both here and there, both now and then. The plateau had always been a liminal space, a high desert caught between the mountains and the lowlands, between ancient paths and modern highways. Maybe it made sense that thin places existed here, where the boundaries between states weren't as solid as they should be. "Maybe," Tully said, "but those children deserved to come home. Whatever it took, they deserved that chance." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, dawn approaching. Tully had been awake for more than 24 hours, had walked more than 20 miles through underground tunnels, and had witnessed things that would have gotten him committed if he tried to describe them in an official report. He was exhausted, confused, and deeply unsettled by what had happened. But 8 families had their children back. That was what mattered. Everything else was just details. As the sun rose over the plateau, painting the volcanic rock in shades of gold and red, the school bus began to fade. Not flickering this time, just a steady, gentle dissolution, like morning mist burning off under the sun's warmth. Within minutes, it was gone, leaving only an empty space in the detention basin and a set of tire tracks that would themselves fade within days. The authorities would argue about what happened. Skeptics would propose elaborate hoaxes. Believers would cite it as proof of parallel dimensions or time travel or spiritual intervention. Scientists would demand the physical evidence that no longer existed. The story would be told and retold, changing with each telling until it bore little resemblance to what actually occurred. But Tully would remember. He'd remember Patricia's face as she finally completed her route. He'd remember the children stepping off that bus, coming home after being lost in a place between places. He'd remember that sometimes the job required more than handcuffs and procedure. Sometimes it required following an impossible bus through the darkness on faith alone. And he'd remember what Amanda Sutherland said to her father as they held each other in the detention basin, crying and laughing at the same time. "Daddy, I wasn't scared. The whole time I knew someone would find the way. I knew someone would come." Someone had come, and they had found the way through tunnels and time, through the thin places where reality bent just enough to allow miracles. The plateau would keep its other secrets, but this one at least had been solved. 3 weeks after the incident at Sunset Crater, Sheriff Ward Tully sat in his office staring at paperwork that made no sense no matter how many times he read it. The official report on the rescue operation had been rewritten 4 times, each version sounding more absurd than the last. How do you document the undocumentable? How do you explain in bureaucratic language that a school bus had existed in 2 states of reality simultaneously and traveled 20 miles through drainage tunnels barely large enough to accommodate it? The final version he'd submitted used carefully neutral language. Victims were located in the drainage system near Sunset Crater following an extensive search operation. All individuals were recovered safely and transported to medical facilities for evaluation. It was technically true while being functionally meaningless. The state investigators who'd reviewed it had asked pointed questions that Tully had answered with equally careful non-answers. Eventually, they'd stopped pushing, perhaps recognizing that some cases existed outside the comfortable boundaries of rational explanation. The children from 2024 had recovered quickly. Sarah Kellerman, Marcus Downing, and the twins Emma and Ethan Marsh had been disoriented and frightened but physically unharmed. Their memories of the experience were fragmented and dreamlike. They remembered getting on the bus, remembered the strange feeling of the vehicle not quite existing, remembered the sensation of being stuck between destinations. But the details were already fading, their young minds protecting them by treating the experience like a bad dream rather than lived reality. The children from 2009 were a different story. Amanda Sutherland and the other 3, Jason Morales, Catherine Dwyer, and Timothy Strand, had no concept that 9 years had passed. For them, it had been a single day. They'd boarded the bus for a field trip on a Tuesday morning in June 2009 and gotten off that same Tuesday evening, as far as their subjective experience went. The fact that it was now October 2018 was incomprehensible to them. Frank Sutherland had his daughter back, but she was still 7 years old while he'd aged 9 years waiting for her return. His wife had left him years ago, unable to cope with the grief and uncertainty. Amanda didn't understand why her mother wasn't there, why her father looked so much older, why her house was different and all her toys were gone. The psychological implications were staggering. How do you help a child adjust to a world that had moved on without them? The state had assigned specialized counselors to all 8 children, people with experience in trauma cases, though Tully doubted any training program covered returned from temporal displacement. The families were coping as best they could, grateful to have their children back while struggling with the impossibility of the situation. Patricia Voss was being held in county lockup pending arraignment. The charges against her were complicated. She'd abducted 4 children, that much was clear. But her motivation had been to save the children from 2009, to finally complete the route and break the loop that had trapped them. The prosecutor was struggling with how to present the case. Do you charge someone with kidnapping when their intent was rescue? Do you prosecute someone for using supernatural means when the court system doesn't acknowledge the supernatural exists? Tully had visited Patricia twice since the incident. She was calm, almost serene, accepting of whatever punishment came. I did what I had to do, she told him. I took those children without permission, put them in danger. That's wrong, no matter what my reasons were. But those other children, the ones from 2009, they're home now. That's worth whatever price I have to pay. Tell me about the between place, Tully had asked during his second visit. What was it like? Patricia had been quiet for a long time before answering. It's hard to describe. It's like being stuck in a photograph in a single moment that never ends. You're aware of time passing around you, but you're not part of it. You're just there, frozen, watching the world move without you. Garrett was there too, trapped in his crash, dying over and over again. Every time I tried to drive the route, I'd see him burning. That's what hell is, Sheriff. Not fire and torture, just being stuck in your worst moment forever. But he's free now. Yes. When we completed the route, when those children got off the bus, the loop broke. Garrett could finally move on. I felt him leave, felt him let go. He'd been holding on because he thought it was his fault, thought if he'd never taken the bus we wouldn't have been trapped. But it wasn't his fault. It was mine. I'm the one who stopped at that turnout, who walked into the shimmer. What was the shimmer? I don't know. A thin place, maybe. Somewhere, the boundaries aren't as solid as they should be. The indigenous peoples knew about places like that, marked them as sacred or dangerous or both. We just paved over them and pretended they didn't exist. She'd looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. But they do exist, Sheriff. And now you know it, too. Tully hadn't been able to argue with that. He did know. He'd seen things during that operation that couldn't be explained away or rationalized. The bus had existed in 2 states simultaneously. It had traveled through spaces too small to contain it. 8 children had returned from places outside normal time. These were facts, witnessed by dozens of people, documented by cameras and instruments, yet impossible according to everything science understood about reality. The news media had tried to make sense of it, with predictable results. Some outlets treated it as a heartwarming rescue story, carefully omitting the stranger details. Others went full conspiracy theory, claiming government experiments or alien intervention. A few tried to report it straight and gave up when the facts refused to form a coherent narrative. The story had been viral for about a week, then faded as newer impossibilities competed for attention in the endless scroll of modern media. But the plateau remembered. The locals, the ranchers and longtime residents who'd lived here for generations, they understood in ways the outside media never would. They'd always known the land held secrets, that there were places where the rules changed. The incident had just confirmed what they'd suspected all along. Rook Ellison, the truck driver who'd first reported the bus, had stopped by Tully's office a few days after the rescue. "I'm not driving that route anymore," he'd said bluntly. "My company can reassign me, or I'll find other work. But I'm not going back to Highway 89. Why not? Because now that I've seen what can happen there, I'll be looking for it. And once you start looking for the thin places, Sheriff, they start looking back. I've heard stories from other drivers. Strange things on that highway. Always have been. I just don't want to be the one who finds the next one." Tully understood that instinct. Part of him wanted to transfer to a different district, somewhere far from the plateau and its thin places. Somewhere normal, where school buses stayed in one state of reality, and missing children stayed missing or were found through conventional means. But he'd taken an oath to protect this county, and that meant all of it, even the parts that didn't make sense. Now, 3 weeks later, he was trying to move on. The case was technically closed. The children were safe, the families reunited. The impossible bus had dissolved into morning air, leaving no evidence of its existence. He should have been satisfied. Instead, he was troubled by details that didn't fit, questions that had no answers. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Mercy. "Ward, we've got a situation. Teacher from Marble Canyon Elementary is reporting some unusual behavior from the children who were on the bus. Thought you'd want to know." Tully felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of behavior?" "Better if you hear it directly. She's driving down now, should be here in 20 minutes. The teacher was a woman named Dorothy Pacheco, late 50s, who'd been working at Marble Canyon Elementary for 30 years. She sat across from Tully, looking worried and uncertain. "Sheriff, I don't know if this is important, and I don't want to cause alarm, but something's not right with those children." "The ones from this year or the ones from 2009? Both, but especially the ones from 2009. It's like they're not quite here, if that makes sense. They're physically present. They respond when spoken to. They do their work. But there's a distance to them, like they're seeing something the rest of us can't. That's probably normal, given what they've been through. Trauma can cause dissociation. I understand that. I've dealt with traumatized children before. This is different. She pulled out a folder containing drawings. This is what Amanda Sutherland drew in art class yesterday. Tully looked at the drawing. It showed a yellow school bus rendered in crayon with a child's lack of precision. But surrounding the bus were other shapes, dark and indistinct, pressing in from all sides. And in the windows of the bus were faces, dozens of them, far more than the 8 children who'd been on the real bus. She said she was drawing her friends, Dorothy explained. When I asked who all these other people were, she said they were the ones who couldn't get off, the ones who are still riding. Tully felt cold. Did any of the other children draw similar pictures? Dorothy laid out more drawings. Jason Morales had drawn a highway that split into multiple paths, each path leading to a different colored bus. Catherine Dwyer had drawn what looked like a tunnel with lights, but the lights had faces in them. Timothy Strand had drawn something that took Tully a moment to understand. A school bus driving in a figure 8 loop, the same children visible in the windows each time around. And it's not just drawings, Dorothy continued. They talk about the bus like it's still there. Amanda asked me yesterday when the driver was coming back. I told her Patricia Voss was in jail, couldn't drive anymore. Amanda said, no, not that driver. The real driver. The one who's always been driving. What does that mean? I don't know. But Sheriff, there's something else. The children from this year, the ones who were only on the bus for a few hours, they're starting to act the same way, like something followed them back. After Dorothy left, Tully sat in his office trying to process what he'd been told. He'd assumed the rescue had been complete, that bringing the children home had ended the story. But what if it hadn't? What if something from that between place had come back with them? He drove out to Frank Sutherland's house that evening. Frank answered the door looking exhausted, the stress of adjusting to his daughter's return etched in every line of his face. Ward, everything okay? I need to talk to Amanda, if that's all right. Frank's expression darkened. Is this about her drawings? The school called me. I told them she's just processing trauma. It'll pass. Maybe, but I'd like to hear from her directly. Amanda was in the living room watching television shows that had been popular in 2009 because the current programming confused her. She looked up when Tully entered, her face brightening. Sheriff, you're the one who found us. That's right. Amanda, can I ask you some questions about your trip? The field trip, sure. Your teacher said you drew a picture of the bus with lots of faces in the windows. Can you tell me about that? Amanda's expression grew serious. Those are the other children, the ones who got on before us. Before you? You mean before 2009? I guess. Time is weird on the bus. It's all happening at once. We got on, and there were already kids there, and they said they'd been riding for a long time. And after we got on, more kids got on. It just kept going. Tully felt the cold sensation spreading through his chest. Amanda, those other children. Are they still on the bus? She nodded. They couldn't get off. We could get off because someone came to find us, and because Ms. Voss finished the route. But the others, they don't have anyone looking for them, so they're still riding. Where's the bus now? Amanda looked at him like he'd asked a stupid question. It's still out there. It's always out there. You can't see it unless you need to, but it's there. After leaving Sutherland's house, Tully drove to Highway 89, to the turnout where Patricia had first stopped in 2009, where she'd seen the shimmer that had started everything. He parked and got out, standing in the cold October evening, looking at the historical marker that mentioned ancient trade routes. The sun was setting, painting the plateau in shades of orange and purple. The landscape looked peaceful, beautiful even. But Tully couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something was out there in the emptiness, waiting. His radio crackled. "Ward, this is Mercy. We've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on Highway 89 about 10 miles north of your position." Tully's hand tightened on the radio. "What kind of vehicle?" There was a pause. "Caller says it's a school bus. Yellow, older model. Hazard lights flashing. I'm en route." He drove north, his heart pounding, telling himself it would be a different bus, a coincidence, something explainable. But he knew better. He'd seen too much to believe in coincidences anymore. The bus was exactly where the caller had reported, sitting on the shoulder with its hazard lights pulsing in the gathering darkness. The same faded yellow paint, the same rust patterns, the same Plateau Unified School District lettering. Tully pulled up behind it, hands shaking slightly as he reached for his flashlight. He approached slowly, seeing his own reflection in the dark windows. The door was closed. He knocked, called out. No response. He tried the handle and found it locked, just like before. Moving to the windows, he looked inside. Empty seats. Nothing visible in the driver's area. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, he realized the bus wasn't quite empty. There were shapes in the seats, indistinct and shadowy, like reflections that didn't quite match reality. And the more he looked, the more he saw. Children, dozens of them, sitting silently in the darkness. Not quite there, not quite not there. One of them, a girl with dark hair, turned toward him. Her face was familiar. He'd seen it before in missing persons files from decades ago. Melissa Cordova, disappeared in 1987 while on a school trip. Never found, case still open. She pressed her hand against the window, her form flickering like a candle flame. Her mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear but could somehow understand. "Help us find the way home." Tully stepped back from the bus, his mind reeling. Patricia hadn't broken the loop. She'd only managed to free a few children from it, the ones with people actively looking for them, with enough love and determination pulling them back. But the loop itself still existed, still trapped children who'd gotten on that bus over the years, children whose disappearances had been explained away or forgotten, who had no one left looking for them. The bus represented something older than Patricia's mistake in 2009, older than Garrett's crash in 2011. It was a thin place made physical, a crack in reality that had existed for decades, maybe longer. And it was still collecting lost children, still driving its route through the spaces between. His radio crackled again. "Ward, the caller is on the line. He wants to know if you found the bus." Tully looked at the vehicle, at the shadowy faces watching him from within. "Tell him yes, I found it. But Mercy, I need you to pull every missing persons case from the last 50 years involving children who disappeared near Highway 89. Everyone who vanished on school trips, field trips, any kind of travel through this area. Ward, what's going on? We didn't finish the job. We saved 8 children, but there are more. Maybe dozens more. They're still lost, still trapped, and they need someone to bring them home." He spent the next hour sitting in his truck, watching the bus, documenting it with his phone's camera. But when he reviewed the footage later, the bus would look completely empty, just an abandoned vehicle with no sign of the passengers he'd seen. The thin places didn't photograph well. They existed in the corners of perception, in the space between seeing and believing. By the time backup arrived, the bus was beginning to fade, its solidity wavering like heat shimmer. Deputy Martinez pulled up, got out, and stared at the vehicle. "Sheriff, is that—" "Yeah, it's back. How is that possible? We saw it dissolve." "That version dissolved. But the bus exists in multiple times, multiple states. We freed some of the children from one version, but there are others. The loop is bigger than we thought." They watched as the bus faded completely, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel shoulder. Those, too, would be gone by morning, Tully knew. The thin places covered their tracks well. Over the following days, Mercy compiled the missing persons cases Tully had requested. The list was longer than he'd expected, going back to 1961. 37 children who'd disappeared in the vicinity of Highway 89 under various circumstances. Most cases had been investigated thoroughly at the time, but yielded no answers. The children had simply vanished, leaving families with questions that would never be resolved. 37 children, and Tully had seen at least that many faces in the bus windows. They were all still there, still riding, still hoping someone would find the way to bring them home. He met with Patricia in her cell. "I saw the bus again. On Highway 89, same location where Ellison first reported it." Patricia nodded as if she'd expected this. "It's not done, is it?" "No, there are more children. Dozens of them, going back decades. They're all trapped in the loop." "I know. I saw them when we were driving through the drainage system. They were standing in the tunnels, watching us pass. I thought completing the route would free them all, but it only freed the ones connected to me. The ones I'd taken, the others are still waiting." "How do we free them?" "I don't know if we can. Each one needs someone to find them, to light their path home. But most of them have been gone so long, there's no one left looking. Their families have died or moved on. They're forgotten." Tully thought about that. About children trapped forever because they'd been forgotten. It was worse than death. What if we didn't forget? What if we kept looking? "Sheriff, you can't save them all. You'd spend your whole life chasing a ghost bus through the plateau, and even then, you might not reach them." "Maybe not, but I can try." He started that night, pulling the file on the oldest case, a boy named Christopher Dalton who'd disappeared in 1961 during a Boy Scout camping trip. The troop had been traveling on Highway 89 when their bus broke down. While waiting for help, several boys had wandered off to explore. Only Christopher never came back. The search had lasted weeks, but the plateau had kept it secret. Tully drove to the location where the bus had broken down, a spot now marked only by a newer section of road. He sat there for hours, waiting, watching. Around midnight he saw it. Just for a moment, a flicker at the edge of his vision. A yellow bus sitting on the shoulder, hazard lights pulsing weakly. He approached carefully, flashlight ready. Through the windows he saw the children. And among them, a boy in a Boy Scout uniform from the early 60s, looking hopeful and terrified in equal measure. Tully had brought something with him, a photograph of Christopher Dalton's parents taken from the case file. They'd both passed away years ago, but he held the photograph up to the window, showing it to the boy. "Your parents never stopped looking for you. They looked until the day they died. They never gave up, never forgot. It's time to come home, Christopher." The boy's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. He stood up from his seat and moved toward the door. For a moment, Tully thought it would work, thought the child would step off the bus and return to the world. But the boy stopped at the top of the stairs, unable to move further. The loop held him. "I can't," the boy's voice came from far away. "There's no home to go to anymore. My parents are gone. The house is gone. Everything I knew is gone." Tully understood then. It wasn't enough to be found. There had to be a home to return to, a connection strong enough to pull them back. For the children from 2009 and 2024, their families had still been waiting. Their homes still existed. But for children who'd been gone for decades, that anchor was lost. "Then we'll make a new home," Tully said. "We'll remember you, all of you. We'll speak your names and tell your stories and make sure you're not forgotten. That's a kind of home, too." He didn't know if it would be enough. The boy at the door wavered, uncertain, and then the bus began to fade. But as it disappeared, Tully thought he saw the child smile, just slightly, as if the promise of being remembered was worth something even if freedom remained impossible. He spent the next 3 weeks documenting every case, every missing child, creating a comprehensive record of the lost. He built a memorial at the county building, a wall with photographs and names, stories and dates. 37 children who'd vanished on the plateau, who'd never been forgotten even if they'd never been found. The families who remained were grateful, some crying as they saw their lost loved ones honored. But Tully knew the memorial served a deeper purpose. It was a beacon, a lighthouse for children lost in the thin places. As long as someone remembered, as long as their names were spoken and their stories told, they weren't completely gone. The bus continued to appear on Highway 89, always at night, always with its hazard lights flashing. Reports came in regularly, drivers calling 911 to report an abandoned school bus, always in slightly different locations. Tully responded to each call, approached each manifestation, spoke to the children inside even though he couldn't free them. It was Mercy who finally put words to what everyone was thinking. "Ward, you can't keep doing this. You're wearing yourself out chasing something you can't catch." "I'm not trying to catch it. I'm trying to bear witness. Someone has to." "Why? Why does it have to be you?" "Because I've seen them. I know they're there. Once you know, you can't unknow. You can't just walk away and pretend the thin places don't exist." Rook Ellison had been right. Once you started looking for the thin places, they looked back. But Tully had made his choice. He would keep looking, keep documenting, keep speaking the names of the lost. It wouldn't save them, but it would mean they weren't alone in the darkness. 6 months after the incident at Sunset Crater, on a cold March evening, Tully sat in his truck at the turnout where it had all started. The historical marker stood silent in the twilight, its words about ancient trade routes taking on new meaning. Those old routes hadn't disappeared. They'd just gone underground, become part of the drainage system, the thin places, the spaces between. And along those routes, the bus drove its endless loop, collecting the lost and the forgotten, the children who'd wandered into thin places and couldn't find their way home. It had been doing it for decades, maybe centuries in some form or another. It would probably continue long after Tully was gone. But as long as he was sheriff of this county, someone would be watching. Someone would respond to those 911 calls. Someone would stand at the window of that impossible bus and speak to the children inside, let them know they were seen, they were remembered, they were not forgotten. His radio crackled. "Ward, we've got another report. School bus on Highway 89, 10 miles south of Marble Canyon, hazard lights flashing." Tully started his engine. "I'm en route." As he drove through the gathering darkness, he thought about something Amanda Sutherland had said during one of his visits. The bus goes in a circle. It's always looking for the way home, but there are too many homes to find. So it just keeps driving, hoping someday it'll get all the way around. Maybe that's all any of them could do. Keep driving, keep searching, keep hoping that someday the circle would close and the lost would find their way home. Until then, someone had to bear witness. Someone had to stand in the darkness and say, "I see you. I remember. You are not alone." The plateau stretched out around him, vast and empty and full of secrets. Somewhere out there, a school bus was driving through spaces that shouldn't exist, carrying children who should have been home decades ago. And somewhere on that bus, Melissa Cordova and Christopher Dalton and 35 others were waiting, hoping, believing that someone would remember. Tully drove on through the darkness, his headlights cutting through the night, following a route that led everywhere and nowhere, chasing a bus that couldn't be caught but couldn't be abandoned. The thin places watched him pass, patient and eternal, knowing that eventually everyone found their way to the between places, the spaces where the lost ones gathered. But not tonight. Tonight he was still here, still searching, still bearing witness to the impossible. And as long as he kept searching, the children on that bus had hope. It might not be enough to free them, but it was enough to keep them from being forgotten. And in the thin places of the plateau, between the mundane and the impossible, between remembering and forgetting, hope was its own kind of home. The radio crackled again. "Ward, the caller is asking if you found it." Ahead in the darkness, hazard lights pulsed their steady rhythm. A yellow school bus sitting on the shoulder, waiting, always waiting. "Yeah," Tully said quietly into the radio. "I found it. Tell them I'm at the scene." He pulled over behind the bus and reached for his flashlight, preparing to do what he'd been doing for months now, what he would probably do for the rest of his career. Bear witness. Remember. Refuse to let the lost remain forgotten. The bus flickered in his headlights, existing and not existing, carrying its burden of impossible passengers through the endless loop. And Ward Tully, sheriff of Coconino County, stood watch over the thin places, one more soul refusing to look away from what the plateau revealed to those willing to see. Somewhere in the darkness, children who should have been home decades ago pressed their faces to windows that might or might not be real, hoping this time would be different.